2, 3.
Okay, Mr. Marshall. I have 6:33 on my phone. You are the co-host of this meeting. We have my colleagues Nate Malloy and Jeff Bagg with us in the house. Amherst Media is here. The attendees are joining us. You are the co-host of this meeting. I think we're all set to go.
All right, thank you, Pam.
You're welcome.
Welcome to the Amherst Planning Board meeting of January 21st, 2026. My name is Doug Marshall, and as chair of the Amherst Planning Board, I am calling this meeting to order at 6:33 p.m. This meeting is being recorded and is available live stream via Amherst Media. Minutes are being taken. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, as extended by Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, and further extended by Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2025, this planning board meeting will be conducted via remote means using the Zoom platform. The Zoom meeting link is available on the meeting agenda, posted on the town website's calendar listing for this meeting. Or go to the planning board webpage and click on the most recent agenda, where the Zoom link is listed at the top of the page. No in-person attendance of the public is permitted. However, every effort will be made to ensure the public can access the meeting in real time via technological means. In the event public access is disrupted for reasons of economic hardship or despite best efforts, we will post an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting on the town's website. Board members, I will take a roll call. When I call your name, unmute yourself and answer affirmatively and return to mute. Bruce Coldham.
I am here.
Fred Hartwell.
I am here.
Jesse Major.
Present.
I, Doug Marshall, am present. Angus MacLeod.
Present.
Johanna Newman.
Present.
And Jarrah Smith has told us he will be arriving a little bit late. All right, thank you, board members. If technical issues arise and discussion needs to pause, it will be noted in the minutes. Please use the raise hand function to ask a question or make a comment, and I will call on you to speak. After speaking, remember to remute yourself. To the general public, the general public comment item is reserved for public comment regarding items not appearing elsewhere on tonight's agenda. Please be aware the board will not respond to comments during general public comment period. Public comment may also be heard at other times during the meeting when deemed appropriate by the planning board chair. Please indicate you wish to make a comment by clicking the raise hand button when public comment is solicited. If you have joined the Zoom meeting using a telephone, please indicate you wish to make a comment by pressing *9 on your phone. When called on, please identify yourself by stating your full name and address and put yourself back into mute when finished speaking. Residents can generally express their views for up to 3 minutes or at the discretion of the planning board chair. If a speaker does not comply with these guidelines or exceeds their allotted time, their participation may be disconnected from the meeting. All right. Time is 6:36. We'll go right into the first agenda item, which is approval of minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes to review. They were both in our packet. The first is from November 19th of last year. Fred, I see your hand.
Yes, you do. I have a very significant problem with these minutes. Specifically on the last page, just before the action that resulted in the change of the zoning map on a vote of 5 to 1 to 1, I was the one, and I spoke against it. And there is no presentation of the argument that I made. And I think that that argument should be in the minutes. And the vote stands for itself. It will go forward. But, and I have written, and I can forward to you, Pam, the statement that I suggest should go in here.
That would be really helpful, Fred. So you're talking about the December 3rd minutes?
The September.
Okay, yep.
No, I'm sorry. I thought we were on the November 19th minutes.
Right, that's where I think we are.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the November minutes.
Okay,
And
yep, gotcha.
So
okay,
in that case, why don't we just postpone this till the next meeting?
Okay.
Did anybody else have comments on the November 19th minutes that could get incorporated by the next time? Okay. All right. So,
I'll send that
yeah,
to Pam.
Fred and
Thank
Pam,
you.
why don't you coordinate on
Thank
that?
you.
And then we can redistribute them. All right. Let's go on to the December 3rd minutes. Any comments about those? No comments. Those were fine. Johanna.
I move to approve the minutes from December 3rd.
All right. Thank you. Anybody want a second, or shall I go ahead and second? Oh, I don't know, Jesse or Angus, one of you.
Sure, I'll second that.
All right. All right, we'll go through a vote. Starting with you, Bruce
Aye.
and Fred,
Aye.
Angus,
Aye.
Jesse,
Aye.
Johanna,
Aye.
and I'm an aye as well. 6 in favor, 1 member absent. The motion passes. The December 3rd minutes are approved. All right, so at this point, we have the public comment period. And so I see 7 attendees from the public. This is the time, members of the public, to raise your hand to let us know if you would like to speak at this time and make a public comment about something that does not appear later on the agenda. So while we're waiting for people to raise their hands, I will, as I usually do, read the names of the people who are showing up as attendees. We have A. Churchill, Elizabeth Vierling, George Ryan, Hilda Greenbaum, Maura Keene, Pam Rooney, and Sarah Barr. All right, I still don't see any hands raised from the public. So I guess I will conclude that there are none at this point for tonight. So the time is 6:41. We'll go on to the next item on the agenda. All right, so the third item on the agenda is Planning and Economic Development Director Jeff Bagg. Welcome, Jeff. Discussion with new Planning and Economic Development Director regarding zoning priorities and the goals of the town manager. Take it away, Jeff.
Great. Yep. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. I will be, I think doing this section in coordination with Nate, and really just acknowledging a lot of the hard work that you guys have already done. Just like, I guess, a quick background, for those of you who don't know me, I did work in Amherst for about 8 years, from 2008 to 2016, where I was a senior planner, and I worked primarily with the zoning board of appeals at that time. And as that time went on, I was able to participate in other projects. And then I left Amherst just for some new opportunities and new challenges. And so I spent 2 years working for the Central Mass Regional Planning Commission. So they had an office out in Worcester, and really got exposed to a lot of the activities in Central Mass in particular. And during that time, I was thinking of a couple things that were highlights, as I actually served as a shared town planner for 2 small towns out there. So I got to really experience very small town planning boards, the town of Rutland and the town of Barry in Central Mass. And so that was really good exposure just to see how, towns without planning staff function. And that was one of the primary goals. And ultimately, a couple of years later, the town of Rutland hired their first town planner. And I worked on and kind of led a team to create a master plan for the town of West Brookfield. Um, So then after that, that was when this opportunity in the city of East Hampton came up. That's my hometown. That's where I live. I kind of lived there the whole time. We've lived here since 2010. So that opportunity as a city planner was available, and I got offered that position and really embarked on several different efforts there. But one was to expand that department. So I was able to make a part-time conservation agent full-time. I was able to make a part-time arts coordinator full-time. So this was a period of over 6 years, and managed a staff, several staff people doing very important different projects. And then finally, sort of as a result of that, I was able to make the position change from city planner to planning director. And I did that, with coordination and relationships with city council and the mayor, and I had to go through a process and create the necessary funding for all of those. And then just a myriad of projects, one of which would be like a 40R district was one of the projects that I led, an expansion of an existing 40R on Northampton Street in East Hampton, and just shepherded quite a few projects through. And then more recently, I had an opportunity to work for a consulting firm also out of Worcester. So it's a company called the BSC Group, and so they're multidisciplinary, but 100% of the clients were municipalities, and so that's what I've been doing for the past about year and a half. And I guess a couple of the big projects were out on Cape Cod. The town of Yarmouth went through a local comprehensive plan process, so it's basically their master plan on Cape, and led that, and then a couple smaller master plan projects and a couple site planning efforts. Um, and so then this opportunity came up, and through a whirlwind of activities, here I am. Happy to be here.
You're welcome.
Um, but I'm pretty sure that you must know that as part of this change in the planning department, so Nate's position was advanced to assistant planning and economic development director, and there is like some really high importance to that in terms of the structure. So Nate has a really good handle on the day to day and working with the staff who manage sort of, your board, the zoning board of appeals, the historical commission, and all those other, important functions. So Nate's really in charge of overseeing that, and that's important to allow this position to be higher level and kind of overarching between planning and economic development. And so I started on December 1st and really just been meeting with a lot of people, one or two meetings per day for the past, 30 days, to just reorient myself and, of the work that Nate's doing and the other staff, just trying to be really clear that although I worked here in the past, it doesn't mean that I know everything. And so it's going to really getting reacquainted to everything that's been going on. So I think with that, Nate, I'll shift to you in a second, but I think, the town manager and the town council have established goals. I think they've done this for a couple of years, but there seems to be this renewed emphasis on really trying hard to have the various groups in town work to actually help accomplish those goals kind of together as a big team. So I don't know, I'm assuming they've been transmitted out to you. There's 6 primary goals, and then there's action items under each of them. And I know as the planning department, what we're trying to do, and it's early, is look at the projects that we have either underway or are thinking about, and hoping and making sure that they align somehow to at least one of those goals. And there will always be a few that don't, but more and more, housing and economic development, it's actually housing and economic vitality is sort of this overarching bucket, and really to ensure the health and safety of the residents of Amherst and continue making advances in racial equity and social justice. Sorry, I was reading the wrong one. To ensure the present and future economic well-being of the town, and ensure access to safe, affordable, attainable housing for low and moderate income residents as set forth in the town council's comprehensive housing policy. So that's really this overarching charge for us, and alongside all the great work that this group did to get the housing production plan adopted. So, I think with that as an overview, Nate has really been working with you all on the priority list. And so I don't know how best to initiate this discussion, but the list has, quite a few items, and there are a few that the planning department and other staff really hope to advance over the next year, and then a lot that the committees, the subcommittee, and the planning board have talked about. So, Nate, maybe you can give a little guidance as to how you want, or Doug, how you want to have this discussion. I'm here to be part of that.
Sure.
Nate, why don't you go ahead? I think it has been a little while since we looked at the list, I think, but you had it in the packet, I believe.
Yeah. No, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I think some of it was, in the past, staff would work and try to help guide the planning board, say in terms of maybe these priorities from the town council or town manager. But I think being more transparent about it, and also the kind of the economic development piece. So, planning is economic development in a sense, and so I think sometimes we haven't, clearly expressed that, right? So zoning is providing for opportunity for growth, and I think it's just a renewed interest in that. And how do we do that? I mean, we've talked about village centers, we've talked about more housing. What can we do, downtown? And so I think it's just, to me, it's having Jeff here, and then this conversation today is saying, okay, well, what are the priorities for the next 6 months, 10 months, a year with the planning board and the planning department? And so we have the zoning priorities list, which really has just become something we hadn't done in a few years. And with the subcommittee and with staff, just kind of compiling that all over again. And, after tonight, my idea would be to say, okay, what are, 4 to 6, 5 to 7, whatever it is, but some number that we set, maybe a timeline to, really work on and bring to council, or try to get, to a point where they're in a format that could be moved forward. And then maybe what are some others that are, phase 2. And so not to forget about what we've been working on. And so, zoning takes a long time from, concept to becoming an amendment, and then back through the hearing process and to approval. And so just trying to make sure we have, a good timeline on that, and kind of what are priorities for the town and for the board and staff. And so, we focused a lot on housing. There could be some things about, right, village center zoning. We have funding for East Amherst. And so, I think a lot of things tie together. I think it's good to have that kind of bigger picture of what the town will be working on and what we think we could, pursue in the next year. And I know we'll have our regulatory reviews of projects, and we have other things the board will have to do, but, with the subcommittee, or if we have time at meetings, let's try to, keep things moving forward. And so, we had a few zoning amendments passed a few years ago, but then there wasn't much last year, and we worked on a few things. But, it would be great to consistently have, a few every year, right? Or we have, something that we think we could be working on. And I don't want to diminish like technical fixes to the bylaw, right? I mean, some of the things in the list are like, oh, let's change permit granting authority in sections of the bylaw. And that's a defined term. And then there's, planning board, zoning board, and there's permit granting board or something. And there's all these terms, but for staff, there's meaning there in terms of administrative approval, but then it's also clarity because, it's inconsistent terms. And, it seems like an easy fix, but, it'll affect every section of the bylaw. And then, it might take a little time to explain why we want to do that, for instance. And so, yeah, I didn't necessarily have a structure. I think, I was hoping this could be a time for the board to have questions or comments, and then just having a conversation about what we do think are priorities and how we could, structure different, projects or initiatives. And so, for instance, the downtown design standards hopefully get made public soon. We have this East Amherst study happening. Those are going to be really big projects for the town and hopefully the planning board. We have, some other zoning initiatives the subcommittee's been working on. So how do we fold those in? We have ideas from staff. We might get more ideas in the next few months. And so just, kind of having an overall picture of that, as we move through the months.
All right. So Nate, are you thinking you will show the list on the screen, and we're going to have a conversation about which ones seem to us to be priorities? I mean, I know you guys, you have the downtown design standards that the town has invested a lot of money in, and some community members, including Bruce and me, have spent a fair amount of time looking at, but the rest of the board doesn't know. So that's probably a pretty major initiative for this year. And then you mentioned the grant for East Amherst, which probably has a time limit on it. You spend it or you lose it. So that might be another major thing or, and then you probably have certain technical things that you'd like to do that are staff sponsored, and then there's all the other ideas. And is that kind of is that what you want to talk about, all the other ideas?
Yeah, and I think like Jeff mentioned, kind of the goal of housing and economic vitality, kind of the umbrella of what is that, and there's a few others that the council, other categories they have for the town manager, and just saying like, okay, well, we've been focusing on housing. Is there any part that we could focus in on economic development, specifically say, that's still related to zoning or other regulations, and then even infrastructure, are there things, right, like through the design standards where if we like the right-of-way standards that, has implications for public infrastructure and amenities. And so just kind of understanding all that. And so we are kind of working towards some common goals. And even though, it may not seem like it, I think it'd be great to have Jeff come back periodically and, kind of like, right, recenter the board or talk about what maybe shifting priorities have been in the last 6 months or a quarter of a year, just so we kind of understand that. And so, like the list is big, I agree, right? And this could be a few years, but maybe things have to shift and move around, and it's really kind of keeping that list relevant for what we think is important. And so, right.
Okay.
So, right. My idea would be we keep adding to this list. So if there's ideas tonight, it always goes on this list, and I don't want to lose it. It's something that I'd like staff to maintain, and then come up with say a different kind of way to prioritize items on that. And so, like a few years ago, we had this kind of list, and then literally it just stopped. No one was really keeping track of it. It might be in planning board minutes or ZBA minutes, but to me, it's nice to have something where it becomes a repository of ideas, and it'd be nice to then to refer back to it and say, yeah, look what we talked about here, as opposed to, looking back through minutes, just kind of having a central document. And so that's to me what this has started as. And from that, I feel like we have another document that really then kind of summarizes some of these and really maybe puts a timeline to them and what action steps are and how to move them forward.
All right, I see 3 hands from board members. Before I call on them, Jeff, I saw your hand for a minute and then it dropped. I'll give you one last chance to say something else before I go to the board members.
Thanks. I think I'll wait. I'd like to hear, what
Okay.
the 3 board members say, but there are some more. There's some discussion to have, but I think I would defer to the 3 members to see what your initial reaction is first.
Okay, Jesse?
Thanks. I guess this is a question for you, Jeff, since you're here, and I'm hoping you can share different perspective, some different insight. I can, like all of us, I'm sure, completely agree with this 4th point, right? To ensure economic well-being and attainable housing in Amherst. From my perspective, and the whole reason I got involved with planning board in the first place is you cannot address this without addressing student housing in some way in our town. And that conversation doesn't show up here in the goals, which maybe is okay. That conversation, I feel like, does not happen a lot in other circles that I've seen other than planning board and subcommittee. And so I'm wondering if you could share with us your perspective on the town manager and the council and your own perspective on how do we address this? Because in order to do, again, in my view, in order to achieve that housing for year-round residents, we have to also figure out how to address the student housing ratio issues that we have in our town. So I'm hoping you can share with us what kind of appetite you have, what kind of appetite you think the council has, the manager has, for some of the things we've been talking about, which are all basically ways to either restrict or limit or just organize student housing to allow for this other type of housing, so it doesn't just get gobbled up by student rentals.
Yeah, obviously that's one of the biggest issues, and you're right, it's not really these are labeled as the town manager goals, but I think that they are sort of confirmed and ratified by the town council, so we're assuming they're kind of one and the same. Not a straight path to student housing in those goals, so I can totally see that. I guess it's a little bit of a wind-up, and I don't want to cut off the other members, but I think there are at least 3 known sort of initiatives that are going to need to be dealt with sort of now. And And I think what we have to try to do is keep a conversation about student housing going, but there is no one solution. There's no simple way to do it. So that I don't have the solution to that yet. I think you guys have had a long list of ideas and there's different ways to do it. And I think that's totally relevant. But I think what Nate and I have been discussing and what's on the document, which someone should share the screen potentially if possible. But they're listed as staff items, but what they really are ongoing initiatives. It reads as the downtown design standards. And Doug kind of mentioned this, East Amherst study. Those are the two primary things right now that we see the need for everybody to be involved with and paying attention to. So, um, I don't know if this is Pam, but the actual priority list, the zoning priority list was what I was hoping you could share, the list of potential zoning amendments.
Not this one.
No, this is the town manager goals.
Okay, hold on.
Um,
Bear with me.
so the downtown design standards is a process that's going to become front and center for a lot of people. So it's all focused on the downtown, and we see that as a important effort that we're all going to need to pay attention to. And then, as Doug mentioned, the East Amherst that's been on. So if you can scroll down just a little bit to the staff items, it's really I'm talking about the first two right now. Those are time sensitive. They're also very important to a lot of people. And the downtown design standards is going to deal with, to some extent, the type of building and the size of buildings, and obviously who might be residing there will be part of that discussion. But we see those two as being critical right now, and we see kind of this wind up over the next several months of having the planning board play a key role in discussing these and holding community meetings and discussions. And so we see those as top priorities. And it's not to say that student housing is not an issue, but we're going to need to focus on those two. From there, and I'm not trying to dodge your question, I think I'll stop there, Jesse, for now, because I think there'll be other, discussion pieces. Things can run in parallel, but what Nate and I are looking at is just that these two are going to be significant, a significant amount of interest and process and time, so that we want to make sure that we have enough bandwidth to focus on those, and they are truly going to be, transformational. That downtown design study, it's going to be set up in a way that it talks about the streetscape, but then also the peripheries and the private property and what, there's a vision, and then what do you need to do for zoning to implement a vision. And so that unto itself, is an estimated 6 to 8 months of process, and then bringing it to the CRC and then town council. So I'll stop there because I think there will be more, but Pam, you can probably stop sharing that for now till it comes back up.
All right, Bruce.
Jeff, I've actually got three questions for you, but I'm going to take them one at a time. And the first question really is exactly initially the same as Jesse's, because I too thought that well, he said it for me, but I would proceed to a question related to that. And you said that there were 3 known initiatives for addressing student housing provisions, needs, and so forth. And I wonder whether they're the same 3 that I've been articulating for 2 or 3 years, which is to say, the institution provides on-campus housing in some kind of PPP or whatever basis, but it's on-campus housing in association with the university. The second being some kind of minimum distribution arrangement where you accept the fact that student housing is going to be satisfied by independent landlords buying up houses and converting them, but you try and control that. And thirdly, by taking some initiative to get a higher density housing, a significantly higher density housing, primarily dedicated to student housing and in the immediate vicinity of campus. Those would be the 3 that I'm imagining. And as we've been ruminating on this for the past 2 or 3 years, I had kind of discounted the minimum distribution one for various reasons, which I won't get into. Had somewhat discounted the first, which was to expect the university to provide the housing because we have we have no power there, and also because the university had professed that it's a good guy in this because it's providing more student housing on campus than most institutions around the country, and so for the past couple of years, I've imagined that the sort of initiative that we've been discussing, where we dedicate opportunities for high density student housing and think about how we can achieve that or incentivize that as being the primary. But I have to say, and this is the question, in the last couple of months, I've come further back towards putting more effort or seeing whether or not the town should not put more effort into persuading the university to join in this effort to provide more housing. And rather than say that they have earned a pass by the amount of housing that they've already provided, the argument seems to me that Amherst is unique in the country. And this is the point. We haven't been able to find, and as we recently dug back into this, another town in the country that has a higher impact ratio than Amherst. None at all, not one. We are unique. Now, we could try and disprove that, and I think that would be a good exercise, because if we can't disprove it, it strengthens the case. But the question, Jeff, is the town manager does not include any statement of objective to work harder to persuade the university to do what they could do with some of the land that they've got, and to engage in some kind of PPP development initiative to take some of the load off of housing. And I know there's issues associated with, well, we don't get tax revenues from this, and it doesn't generate affordable housing, so it's not obvious. But the question is, how do you feel about that? Do you think that the town is just never going to change its attitude, and it will basically give the university a pass from here on into the indefinite future? Or do you think that the town really should up its game a little and try harder to be compelling in its argument to persuade the university to take some of this load on in the way in which I've just mentioned? Where do you come on that personally, and where do you think the town should come on that if you were persuasively successful?
Yep. So I'm not going to be able to answer that, Bruce. I think it's obviously a critical question. And I mean this sincerely, that if you guys have been talking about it for 2 years, it's been going on for 20 years at least, and I've been here for 2 months. So I just want to put some of this in perspective. I appreciate being here, and I appreciate hearing the question. I did listen to probably 6 or 7 of the meetings that you guys have had in the lead up to me choosing to come back. It's whatever the right way to, it's the $60,000 question. Not equipped to answer that today, but I think I've had meetings with the community relations folks at UMass, many of the people that you probably know, but that's an office that at least, at my level, I'll be engaged with talking to them. And then they have, what's called the Amherst Campus Council, which is the regional focus. It's on, how UMass can support economic development throughout the region. So I will be appointed to that group. And they've met supposedly 3 or 4 times, but there's a meeting coming up in February in which I'll be at that meeting. So folks from chambers of commerce in the region, the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, people from UMass, and some other folks. So, Amherst will have a seat at that table. Bruce, I hopefully you understand that I am not equipped to answer that just yet, but I think, this student housing issue is prominent, and I don't think that there's one way to deal with it. I think it's probably protecting some neighborhoods. It's probably looking for a PPP, and it's probably finding some area that's close to the campus that's suitable. But I'm not prepared to kind of give like the guidance that you might want right now. But Nate's been at all these meetings and we're having those discussions. I think we have to intertwine it with other things. I think it doesn't appear to me to be a single standalone solution. So it's going to be intertwined with some other stuff. So Bruce, I'm respectfully dodging the actual answer to that, but I think it's a known issue, and the planning board has taken it really seriously. And I think figuring out how to work towards some potential solutions and talk to town council as to how to make it one of their goals and priorities.
Yeah. Okay,
So-
well, my commitment at the moment anyway is to spend a little bit of time building the best argument that I think can be made and giving it to you. Then you can use it how you feel fit, and we can badger you and so forth as well. But you heard the question, and that was the point.
Yep.
I understand that answers don't always come immediately.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Bruce. Jara, you're next.
Great.
By the way,
Nice to meet you, Jeff.
Jara arrived, what, maybe about 10 minutes ago?
I saw.
7:49.
6:49, 6:49 is what I
6:49.
wrote down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, so I had 6:47, but whatever. Jeff, nice to meet you. My name is Jara. Sorry I'm late. I have 2 young children, and 6:30 is a hard time for me to start these planning board meetings. But I want to say I appreciate what Bruce just said, and I do want to emphasize, I think what people are looking for in Amherst is just more visible leadership on what the town and what the university are thinking about related to housing, because a lot of people, really everybody, is feeling the housing crisis and the crunch, and they just want to know what's the plan. So I would encourage, more visible leadership on that topic in the future. That said, I don't think you dodged Bruce's question. I think you offered a completely reasonable and good solutions to the challenge. So give yourself some credit. I also want to say I appreciate, I noticed earlier that you talked about how you don't want to take on too many initiatives at once. In my line of business, I see way too often town staff are just stretched way too thin, and more projects are just piled on top of them, and then things fall through the cracks. And so I appreciate your steadfastness and commitment to that. I want to share that I think 3 things that I really am concerned about in town, or the things that I think about the most, are the access to starter homes, golden handcuffs, and just a lack of senior home opportunities or downsizing, a lack of just diversity in rental choices. Those are really the three like big ones that I think the most about, and the relationship with UMass. So that's enough about me, but I have a couple questions for you. I'm curious, and I'm sorry if you got into this while I was putting my son down, but I'm curious how you think about addressing how you think about economic development and planning. Is it a comprehensive approach or more of a piecemeal approach? I know that at some point in the future we'll be having a master plan update. Right now we're focusing on just East Amherst. Is your approach thinking more geographically incremental, or is there a time for a more comprehensive reform? I'm kind of curious, where do you see the town going in the next couple of years, to the degree that you can reasonably answer that?
No, I appreciate that. It's a little bit more packaged, so I think I'll explain to you my thoughts on this. I mean, in terms of economic development, it really is something that means something different to everybody. So pretty cognizant that it's not just one term with one thing attached to it. And so kind of the approach that I'm already starting to take is just it's a little unfortunate because it's almost like starting over. But there was a economic development director for a couple of years, and the person started, and didn't finish. And so even just in my, I have this great opportunity where I know just enough about Amherst so that I know something. But in coming back, I was really trying to find information and look at the website and look for where information exists. And the economic development component was left undone. There was an effort in 2018 and a little bit of data in 2020. But that is pretty outdated. As a result of the pandemic and all of the wildness that's been happening, that information that we have from 2020 and 2018 is not useful. So my first order of business is with some available funds that have been accrued in capital planning, and bringing in a consultant to just update the economic development metrics, just get us up to date with data. So what's the economic market? Where are people spending their money? Where are people leaving Amherst to spend their money? There's a whole slew of things that is just baseline information that
Yeah.
we can't really do much without knowing the new data. So this is kind of like a small, quick project, and with the experts who know what they're looking at, we've asked them to identify a few action items, things that are critical to do. And it's not figuring it all out, it's just identifying the action items. And then it comes to this bigger project where, again, submitting through capital planning, requesting some additional funds to do an actual economic development plan for the town. And that's a longer process, a year and a half, where we're going to be actually out in the community talking to businesses, holding forums, finding out people's preferences, looking at the village centers, looking at the downtown, and really just doing a really comprehensive economic development plan, which doesn't exist.
Awesome.
There's quite a bit in the master plan, but if we're, not really able to use 2018 data, some of that stuff from 2010 just doesn't, it's not updated enough. So within the first year and a half, that's my plan, is to give the town an actual plan for economic development. And it'll be a big umbrella with a lot of activities and a lot of different things that would um, need to happen to kind of bolster the great things that are already happening. And so that's the way that I'm approaching economic development in terms of a plan. But I've also been talking to the chamber, the bid, business owners, property owners, and just get a sense of how they've encountered things like the permitting process. There's a lot of perception about that, but Town Hall has done a lot with the permit administrator role and the planning department's role to support new businesses coming in. But we don't really know what new businesses we can support. We don't know what the market is. We don't know what they're looking for. So things like that. And then just the last thing is just, looking at Amherst College, Hampshire College, and UMass obviously as really impactful to economic development and what is, Amherst's trajectory over the next 10 years. So Jared, I hope that starts to answer it. That's the data collection is almost underway. We're almost like with a consultant to start that, and then it'll be capital planning. Hopefully, gets approved. That funding gets approved after the budget. It's part of the budget. So by June or July, we should be talking about that broader actual creating the whole plan, and that would take about a year from there. So that's
Great.
kind of the first 2 months. Kind of look at that approach for that. And
Thank you.
I think it's really obvious, hopefully to this group, but to anyone who's listening, is housing is intertwined with that. So housing is economic development for the town, but it's also necessary for businesses to bring in employees and things like that. So
Yes.
we're in a really good spot because the housing production plan has all that new data and information, and so the consultants have access to that. So I just wanted to actually just say that out loud, that's a part of this.
Great. Thank you.
All right, moving along to Angus.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks, Jeff, for this helpful introduction and orientation to what the planning department is thinking of doing. My question is pretty simple, and it's just asking for a little bit more information about the expected timeline for the downtown review standards and whether they're going to have to go before town council. But I just want to get a sense where it seems like a lot of our thinking about the downtown area is just sort of on hold until those review standards are done. So I'm wondering if you have a sense of what the timeline is for actually getting those across the finish line and in place.
Finish line is tough. I don't know about the finish line, but Nate, you'll back me up here, but there's been an ongoing process with stakeholder groups, and it's been a back and forth, to come up with an actual document, a compromise. And so where we are now is that document, it's a draft will be given to the town very soon. We're expecting it soon. And what that will start is sort of a much more public and outward discussion of what those findings are and what it looks like. Generally speaking, it's set up in like 3 volumes. So this is going to be tremendous. This is a big undertaking, but it's 3 volumes. One is a vision that covers like a proposed vision for the downtown. The second is streetscape improvements and streetscape design standards. So that's like the public owned roadway, in that area. And then the third is all the private properties within the downtown and identifying, proposed heights of buildings and growth potential. And so taking this 3 volume approach, what we think is going to happen is starting to bring this out to some boards and committees for informational purposes. And to be really honest, what we're trying to do is get the consultant to ride along with us and be part of this conversation with all these boards and committees, starting with the planning board. I think what we're trying to do is come on March 4th for the consultant to give this introductory overview presentation to the planning board of the 3 volumes, the structure, some of the goals and objectives that are in it. And this will include the Design Review Board, the Historical Commission, the Disability Access Advisory Commission. And then, we want to get a presentation to the CRC so that everybody gets presented with the volumes of information and how they're set up. And so that would be March and April, probably, is what we're thinking. And then a community meeting, I don't want to be held to this, but like a community meeting thinking around like May to get the community to be aware of what this is. And from there, we would embark on figuring out, okay, so does the planning board adopt the vision? Can we get town council to approve the public realm, the streetscape plan and design guidelines? Because that's essential. We have a DPW who is saying that North Pleasant Street needs consideration soon. So we need those design standards in order for the process to come up with a design and secure funding to actually redo sidewalks and crosswalks and things like that. And then there's the other part, which is the private property and the things that would result in potential zoning changes. And so that is still a little bit fuzzy for us, but we think that to fulfill the vision, there'll need to be a series of zoning changes that will need to take place in order for the vision to happen over time. And so that's where we don't quite have clarity what that'll look like, but it would be presumably after, maybe this summer, this spring and summer, it would be talking about those 3 elements and how to get approval for any or all of them. And so Nate, do you think that that's an accurate kind of description of where we feel like we're at?
Yeah, so the consultant Dawson and Flinker has been working with this working group for, it's about a 40-member group for a long time, and it's a bit behind schedule. And so I think the idea really is that the standards haven't been made public, and so give boards and committees and the public a number of months to look at them and review them and provide comments. And so this working group has done that, but no one else has. Staff has seen it intermittently, but kind of by design, we weren't part of this working group. We wanted it to be, we didn't want to have some kind of influence whether or not we were in the room, right? So it's private, property owners, developers, just residents of Amherst. And so that was kind of the structure of this working group. Yeah, and I think it's I think kind of some of it would be like, how does the planning board look at these standards? How does the other boards and the CRC and what do the public think? And that might, inform kind of the strategy moving forward. Maybe it's, what if it's everyone really likes it and we can try to do it wholesale? Maybe it's, there's a phased approach like Jeff mentioned. It could be that the planning board likes some of the design standards and we could adopt them without them being a zoning change, right? Maybe they can help the board review projects in downtown and village centers, and so they could, be incorporated into the rules and regs. I think there's probably a lot of, a few different ways it could move forward. I think the first part will be really kind of understanding, as Jeff mentioned, does the planning board and others, do they like the vision that Dodson and Flinker came up with? And if so, then how do we get to that vision through, regulatory changes or zoning changes? And so, it might seem as simple as like, oh, we want a 15-foot wide sidewalk in our downtown, but the property lines and the setbacks aren't, so consistent that we get that. And so it might be that we need kind of a variable setback, front setback in the BG and in the downtown, so we get this nice generous sidewalk. And so, that might be easy to understand, but then it's like, okay, how does that actually work in terms of zoning? And how do we change that mechanics of that setback and maybe building height or, different things in terms of, say, roof design? And yeah, I think it'll be a lot. I mean, it's, 3 volumes, there's a lot to each. So it's not like a 20-page document. There's a lot to look at. And we can maybe distill it down in some ways, or the consultant can, through this public process. And so, I think what we had envisioned was, 6 months of just kind of more public process to actually understand and comment on the design guidelines, and then figuring out what's the next, how do we then move them forward after that kind of public engagement process. And so we're hoping to start that next month.
All right. Thank you, Angus. Fred, you are next.
Thank you. This is not as major a point, but it is, I think, somewhat unique to Amherst, and it is critical, and that is the nature of land ownership, particularly with reference to corporate ownership of rather than owner occupancy. But this is having a major influence on the what populates that housing. And I think it is probably a greater issue in Amherst than perhaps in terms of percentage of property almost anywhere else in the state. So I don't want to lose track of that.
All right. Thank you, Fred. I mean, kind of in follow-up to that, Jeff and Nate, you've heard a lot of this conversation. We talked a lot about occupancy of houses and whether there was a way to restrict the types of people that could occupy a house. And we've talked, Fred's brought up ownership. Neither of those facts, let's say, are usually subject to zoning. And so I've felt like we needed to stay in our lane and focus on the zoning and leave the restrictions on occupants or the restrictions on ownership to, some other entity that has that as their charge. I don't know who that is, but it does keep coming up. And so, Nate, you've witnessed it. Jeff, welcome to town. And if you have any ideas for how to get a handle on that and have some regulations that influence that, there's clearly an appetite for it. There's a lot of different opinions about what should be done in those areas, but that is something that we've had trouble with.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I mean, I understand it's a critical issue. I don't think it's a new issue. I think enforcement of controlling who is occupying and owning property is always been a challenge. Maybe there's glimpses of potential coming out of the rental inspection and rental registration program. I mean, I think everything has to probably be found in stride. But the fact that Amherst has gone from a rental registration program to an actual rental inspection program, and it's taken 10 years, but that is a step in the right direction. It doesn't cure the issue that you mentioned, Doug, but it is something and I think we have to keep poking at the edges. But
Mhm.
the mantra is that zoning is potentially not the right tool to regulate occupancy and who occupies a building. So
Well, if I could say one other thing, those two facts that are difficult to regulate. The reason people fix on those is because there's physical manifestations that come out of students in houses and absentee landlords. And the town, through its bylaws, not necessarily zoning bylaws, but sort of general bylaws, can regulate the physical behavior that is visible on properties. So, if there are 5 cars parked on the lawn across the street from me, that could be prohibited, regardless of whose cars they are, or who owns the house. Or if there's, loud noise coming at late at night, that already is prohibited or regulated. So there are ways to do it, but not directly through the facts that people fixate on.
yeah, I'm by no means minimizing the importance of that whole discussion. It's a known issue for sure.
Okay. Fred, did you have anything else?
No, I'm good with that. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Fred. Bruce, back to you, and then Jesse.
Okay. Jeff, this is the second question, I guess. It was formed before you said what you said about, in answer, I think, to Jer about as you move forward with the capital economic development plan, you would include, you would, among other things, be talking with property owners and people in town and so forth. As I've, in the last week or so, particularly have spoken to some property owners and developers, Cinda Jones among them, because she lives up this end of town and I know her. But I've also spoken with Barry Roberts, and I think Angus has spoken to Ron Laverdiere, and I know Carl Wilson is part of, as a developer, is part of the Downtown Standards kind of review committee or what have you. So when I was involved in the comprehensive plan initiative 30 years ago, at the beginning of, I think it was, we just, John Kuhn and I were co-chairs, and it was just really difficult. It seemed that I can recall at the time, seemingly impossible to get the property owners in downtown to participate in the comprehensive plan. And I thought that that was, but that seems to have changed in recent years. So the question would be, is there not some, would it not be wise, would it not be prudent or useful for the town to institute some kind of regular meeting with between the planning staff and perhaps board members, but basically a regular, maybe quarterly, maybe annually, where the people who are actually owning and developing properties in town, we get a chance to engage with them, because we're the planning board and the subcommittee, we spend a lot of time discussing things without really knowing whether what we're thinking we're incentivizing is actually going to be appealing to the people who actually have, do the work, do this stuff, who own the buildings, who own the land, who have professionally engaged in this kind of work in town. Now, I'm not supposedly thinking that we would invite organizations like Beacon and others who do work in town, but are not exclusively, resident in town. But it seems to me that there's a coterie of folks who are routinely involved in development in town. And it seems that it would be, to me, a good idea to have a more structured, regular engagement, rather than wait for this particular this particular study or this particular plan where you initiate an effort to go out and talk to people. Why don't we have let's just say a quarterly or a 6 monthly regular meeting between 20 people, of which, let's say, 15 might show up at any given time. But just have that as a routine thing where you wouldn't have to create a special effort to get it together and so forth. Does that seem like a good idea to you?
Some elements of it are super critical and are a great idea, but I think trying to get a consistent type meeting of those folks, I think it will be a challenge. Everyone's really busy. So I don't know. I don't know if that's viable. It can be certainly something that we talk about with a lot of those folks and find out. But I think something else that's embedded, I think, Bruce, in what you're saying is really understanding what a developer does and how they approach assessing a project and determining if a project's financially feasible, if zoning is a barrier to a project, and just really having honest discussions about what they do and understanding that they're not bad people. It's not just in Amherst, but in a lot of places. Sometimes developers are cast in a negative light. But
Absolutely, yeah.
the reality is that if you look at projects and property, 9 out of 10 things are going to be done by a developer and a team who takes risks and spend years kind of investing in trying to get a project done that they believe that would benefit the town. So I think at some level, Bruce, I think making sure people across boards and committees understand what's involved, I think is key. I think more so than just a regular meeting. So I'm not sure that there would be a regular agenda item, something to advance, but I do think that really being educated, and understanding how zoning can be a barrier and removing certain things, like you said, the incentivizing, I think understanding those levers as early as possible is really important. And that was something that we worked really hard in East Hampton to understand and work closely with developers to understand what is a constraint, what is a solution, and how do we get there. And I think the problem is that every situation can be different, so it's not universally just one thing. But I don't want to front load it too much because I think it'll come up. But one of the things that I wanted to mention related to this is the rest of our priority list. So I know that the group has really looked at this North Amherst overlay, and I think it's an example where in concept, and really like in principle, it's a great idea to take that existing, area of dense housing and incentivize more. But what I see and from my 60 days and hundreds of, like, not hundreds, probably 50 meetings with people, is that where I'm not sure, I'm not hearing anything about a project being there. There's really no zoning that's going to be put in place that will incentivize some of those larger apartment complexes to engage in something significant right now. So I think it's a good discussion piece that has happened, and I think it's been elevated to a point that then we look at the downtown design standards and understand what is involved in that and find out if that would be helpful to protect the town, protect the downtown, but also spur some development. And then the East Amherst Village is an area that, we have people who own property. We have people who are asking for some ways, some paths forward to potentially create some new buildings that don't exist today. And so those, that kind of discussion pieces, those rise up for us because there's people asking about them. And then the last thing, because it was on the list, is the PRP. So the Planned Research Park, is probably 30 or 40 years old in terms of a zoning district. There has not been a lot of development as a result of that district, but we have property owners who own property and they can't do certain things that they want to do. And so they are coming to us and speaking with us about those constraints. And so, we need to take more time to understand what those constraints are and understand what types of projects could be out there for the PRP. But that's why that was item number 3 on the list that was up, is that we think that has opportunity. It has less of the issues that those existing apartment complexes have so much revenue coming in, and there's so much investment that has happened in those properties that it just seems unlikely right now that they're going to demolish buildings, relocate people, build something new, and come back. It just doesn't seem super viable.
Well, you're
So,
right.
so
I
I
talked
think,
with
yeah,
Cinder about
I'll
that.
finish. I'll finish, and I'll let you chime in. I just think that that's where the interaction with the developers, it shouldn't be it shouldn't be seen as such a negative thing to understand what they need as property owners, what they're looking at, and what could actually support them to fulfill some of the things that Amherst has said they want, which is in some level of housing, some economic development, and other projects. So I'll stop with that, Bruce, because I think you were going to say
Yeah.
something.
Well, yeah, I agree that this is absolutely not imagining developers as black hats. It's imagining them as serious players in the community and very serious players. But I did have a long conversation with Cinder Jones a couple of days ago, and your observation that the North Amherst overlay may not have legs is certainly her conclusion, because she owns not the Puffton place, but she owns a place exactly like that, which has been there for a long time, which is debt free, which is generating a handsome annual revenue flow. And she can't understand. She, as a property developer, can't understand. And of course, it's Barbara Puffers and her partners that are owning the Puffton, but she thinks that they would feel the same way, that it would be that our allowed increased density and so forth wouldn't be enough to persuade them to think that why would they abandon what they've got. So it does seem that was part of what caused me to think we should be talking to these folks, because we spent a year thinking about this, and I tried to get to them, but not very hard, not hard enough. And I think that we need to, if we're going to be trying to imagine ways that will cause people who own current properties to redevelop them, because that's where we are now. There's not a lot of green space left. It's redevelopment. And so then you're talking to, you've got to understand, I think, how these folks think. Otherwise, we're not going to be spending our time effectively. And it seems that perhaps we are guilty of not really getting enough wisdom or information, let's say, from the folks whose properties we've been trying to insert ourselves into.
Yeah, and I think the silver lining right now is that the downtown design process has had those people embedded in it in terms of the discussion. It's had residents and property owners to have these robust discussions already. And then there's this compromise, neither side's happy, but it's a compromise. So the good news is that the downtown process has had them engaged from the beginning. And then with the opportunity with East Amherst, with the support, with the grant funding and things like that, I think we can take the lessons learned and we can embed more of those discussions in the East Amherst approach right from the start. And we know that we have property owners who are interested in considering options in East Amherst, so it's a good opportunity to do that, along with the residents and people who pass through there and things like that. But I think having them at the table, those two, and even the PRP for that matter, I mean, they're all good examples of where we think, moderate with moderating it somehow, but understanding who the property owners are and what they're interested in doing. I think we have three really good opportunities to kind of explore that route.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Jeff, do you envision you or Nate, based on what you're hearing in the conversations that you do have with developers, at certain points coming to the board and saying, hey, we've heard about this kind of thing. This is the kind of thing that the developers are saying would be helpful, and using the board to basically get a broader perspective on whether that's a good thing to do in terms of the town's general development, or and in a sense, we respond to what we're hearing from you and maybe focus our efforts in the direction that you're hearing about as having some potential. Because we already get accused of being in the pockets of developers. So if we're publicly, responding to requests from developers, it's a good thing, I guess, if the town is supportive of that, or, we become the bad guys and we should just be not being receptive to that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's somewhere in the middle. Like obviously, no one wants to be in the pocket of a developer. That's not what we're talking about either. But we also don't want to be doing something blind of a property owner or a developer who can put numbers together and tell you like does the project work or not. So we want to be in the middle to have information flowing. Nate, I want to have you chime in, but one thing that so the East Amherst process will have some kind of public, have public discussions and a public meeting embedded in it. And so Nate, correct me if I'm wrong, but we talked about one of the really successful things about the North Amherst overlay was how you hosted a forum for people to come and talk. And I think that would be something that we maybe would want to replicate with the PRP. This is broad areas, and that might be like a process that we can replicate for even just starting to discuss the planned research park areas, because that seemed really successful. And then having that be the basis to move forward on other ideas. But Nate, you raise your hand. I don't know if you want to chime in.
Yeah, thanks. I see Jesse, your hand's raised. Yeah, I was gonna just say, I step away for a second. I like Bruce's idea in that, I think staff, we say we will meet with property owners and developers, and sometimes it's in response to a single issue. I think more recently, I think all parties have been, kind of more willing to communicate and have meetings just to talk generally about, what they might want to see in town. And so I think there has been this shift in the last few years, and I think that's really important and a good thing. I think we can continue to build on that. And so, just kind of like a little example is, we changed the mixed use building standards a few years ago and just at 30% of the gross floor area. And, it's everywhere where mixed use buildings are allowed, but mostly it's in the downtown. And at the time, staff had kind of said, well, would we ever want to do a tiered approach in the village centers? And we didn't. But, what we've been hearing more recently, especially since the pandemic, is that 30% is often, too much in terms of getting, say, financing for a project or even too much space to fill. And we could say, well, the idea is that we want to plan long term. So, well, that's okay if it stays vacant for a while, because once that village center gets built up, it can be full. So that's one approach. Or we could, listen to the developers and say, okay, well, is there a sliding scale approach, or is there some other way to do this? And, some people might say, well, geez, why are we catering to a developer just so they can get financing? But to me, that's not the case. It would be, okay, well, especially what Jeff is mentioning, if we have this new economic development data, really, what is the market for, these non-residential spaces that are mixed-use buildings? And so maybe we keep the percentage, but what we allow in that mixed-use space has to change. Right now, we're really saying it's kind of the traditional retail space, but maybe it could be more, clean manufacturing, like, fabrication labs, or whatever, some kind of, something that right now isn't allowed in zoning because traditionally it was considered an industrial manufacturing use. And so, I think, for instance, having those conversations is really helpful. When Tom Reedy came to the planning board at the last meeting for conditions of University Drive, we kind of asked him some questions, that were somewhat related but kind of tangential to that meeting. And it was great to just have that conversation. He was willing to answer questions about, okay, how was this project permitted, almost 10 years ago, and what were kind of the barriers, and what would be different now given that there was the overlay, and what was his perspective on kind of the permitting then and what could happen now. And just even that 10-minute conversation was really, to me, like it clarified a number of things, and I think it to me would raise more questions and help clarify things and say, okay, well, do we then look at other parts of town? Is it the parking? Is it a special permit? Is it how we define certain things that if not barriers, are developers might have questions. And so I think those are really helpful conversations, and we've never really had it publicly before. And so it is kind of an interesting idea of how do we engage that periodically to know that our efforts are going to be fruitful. So sometimes we talk about changing inclusionary zoning. I think that's a great idea, but what if it deters development, right? And a consultant has always said that, like, what's the what's the nexus between, what you want and what you can get, and is it reasonable? And so we might think it's reasonable, but we might need to hear from all different perspectives to know that it is reasonable. So, and the developer world is part of that. So yeah, I'm sure we can keep talking about it, but I just want to say, I think the board has been doing that. We've had different kinds of meetings in the last few years, and I feel like it's been really helpful to try to move different zoning amendments or different ideas forward. So
I'll just make one comment on that before I go to Jesse. I could imagine or maybe I will just recommend to you, Nate or Jeff, that you just sort of have a list of who are the players in development in town and make a point of having a conversation with them. It can be a private kind of one-on-one conversation with them at least once a year. Just what's working, what's not, what are obstacles, what would you like, so that you can then pass along to us your impression and your sort of synthesis of what you're hearing. And it doesn't have to be a public meeting, with an agenda or something like that. I mean, it's a variant on what Bruce was suggesting, but I think that would be a more natural way to, not take their time with, an agenda that doesn't work for them or a time, but just to keep informed. Okay, Jesse.
Thanks. I won't rehash lots of what's been said. Mostly, Jeff, I want to say thank you for coming and listening to our impossible questions with no answer. In my regular life, I'm in that situation a lot. So thank you. I really appreciate it. I did want to make, I guess, one comment, which is a couple months ago, I spent far too long looking in past minutes of planning board and town meeting and so on. And this harkens back to something you said initially, Jeff, was that this problem around student housing and our ratio here is not new. Yes, it's been known for 20 years. Yes, it's been discussed for 20 years in various formats and various boards. Literally verbatim conversations from years ago we can find in the minutes. And the more I look at it, the more I see this pattern, which is there's a lot of fervor around the problem, and then someone, usually part of the town, says, well, we're waiting on this study result. We're waiting on this next grant. We're waiting on this next thing that will give us the information to inform us about what to do next. And it's this continual waiting. And honestly, I've been pretty frustrated the last couple of years I've been involved with planning board that there's been no appetite for anything other than development. And development is only one lever, right? We're the planning board, we're not the development board. So I think we need to appreciate that. And I hope you, Jeff, and other town staff already knows that I feel this way, will help us work in parallel on these things. I really feel like some kind of regulation, some kind of permitting, some kind of enforcement, all these things are levers we have to use. We're not going to develop our way out of the current housing crisis alone. So I'll just stop there. Thanks.
All right. Johanna.
Thank you. And you'll have to forgive me. I've had a cold that's gotten worse over the course of today. First of all, Jeff, I just wanted to thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you coming and being part of the conversation. I appreciate that from your perspective, the focusing on the downtown design standards and the East Amherst study warrant being priorities. And I also really appreciated hearing your thoughts about the North Amherst overlay, and hearing you put it so clearly. I'm wondering if there are other items that are on like the subcommittee items list of the kind of potential zoning amendments that you would also have some concerns about or caution against. Or if there are some where it's like, oh yeah, you guys should totally, like from my perspective, those are, these ideas are synergistic with what the town is looking to do.
Thanks, that's great. And I appreciate your kindness. I appreciate that a lot. I mean, I think the two things that I think I want to try to mention, there's technical fixes. There's a series of things that have been on the list that more like honestly are kind of like quick fixes, but when we we would want to bundle them together and kind of bring them through the process together for efficiency. So there's probably like 4 or 5 of those. The way that Nate and I have kind of started to talk about this is if you look at that long list and put a year, 2026, as a header, those bigger projects are going to be kind of time consuming, but also fun and involving and going to take effort. And then there's things that continue to be studied. But then we also want to bring some zoning amendments into the process for this year, and then things that arrive for 2027. So technical fixes are something that's on the list that while we're going through those more fun and robust processes, we could probably handle bringing some technical fixes in. And then there's things on the list that should be continued study. And so those should be pursued and kind of edged along to see where they go. But the one that I wanted to mention is that there have been inquiries from both Amherst College and some Hampshire College related things that we think would surface this year as well. Amherst College in particular has asked for time and effort to be given to them to look at what they have for requests and amendments in terms of zoning. So even in addition to the list, there's always these things that rise up. But the rest of the subcommittee items, I don't know enough about all of them to know whether or not there's caution. It was just really, that one that we mentioned already, the North Amherst overlay. But a lot of these are worth pursuing and just putting them on a timeline kind of scale or schedule so that we can make it manageable to investigate and also pursue and move forward, and then kind of have these kind of public processes that we see are necessary over the next year or two. And so that was something that Nate and I were talking about this list, and I think we wanted to talk to the planning board before we reorganize it again. And then Nate, I guess I would defer to you because I'm recalling kind of some discussions about the subcommittees too, and how we want to shape the rest of the priority list. So Johanna, I hope that answers your question. I mean, I think that there are still some stuff that we're kind of looking at to figure out, is it going to pop up this year or is it going to be next year? And then we really want to build this timeline, as Nate described, like this pipeline of projects at different levels. So there's like the studies, then there's projects that can actually get ready and go to the town council process, and then there's always the ones that we're not really aware of and that pop up because there's some potential urgency or something like that. Nate, I don't know if you want to talk about the list in any more detail. I wanted to touch on the technical fixes because that's something that we've been talking about pretty extensively.
Yeah, I mean, I think the next agenda items for the planning board, are looking at the housing production plan, implementation matrix, and then hearing from the housing and zoning subcommittee. And so, like I said, I was thinking that after this meeting, we could kind of restructure that list. And so, maybe there's 2 items that the subcommittee really focuses on, and maybe there's a few that staff does, and you put a timeline, right? Like, by May 1st, we'd like to have, draft zoning language that the planning board is reviewing to then be able to bring to council as zoning amendments, or, maybe it comes from the town manager, but to kind of set a timeline for, some of these as the priorities this year. Knowing that, for instance, if something is brought forward as a zoning amendment and say it goes to council in May, it gets, referred back to the planning board and CRC, and then that could be another few months before it actually then, gets back to a hearing and gets adopted. And so, yeah, I mean, for instance, the traditional, I forgot how we label it on the list, but the under the subcommittee, we've really talked about this traditional neighborhood subdivision kind of update to cluster development, and it's kind of a riff on 40Y, and I think it's a really interesting idea. And so I think, if we talk about that tonight, and we say, yeah, this is this is a priority for the subcommittee, then the subcommittee can work on it in the next few months and really try to generate an idea that becomes a zoning amendment that the planning board understands and supports, and could then propose it to town council. And maybe there's something else that the subcommittee could work on. So I never meant that list would become something that we jump in at all at once. Like I said, it's just become something to build off of, because we hadn't really been doing that in the last few years. We've been talking about things, but we never really had kind of just a list of anything that we mentioned. And so I think, like I said, I'd like to keep this going, and then, create something else that is more manageable, whether it's by, calendar year or however we want to frame it, but that can help us manage it. Because I think if we look at it, it's overwhelming and we get lost. And, some things are redundant, some are, so overly simplistic right now. And so, they have to be kind of discussed and really determine what does that mean? What does it mean to look at row houses or density along major roads? And so, those are just ideas, and I'm not even sure that where they go from there in terms of, is it, the planning board's talked about this, right? So is it a zoning wide change that affects all areas in town? Is it an overlay? So I think, some of it would be, if it's not at this meeting, but over the next few meetings, kind of helping the subcommittee focus on a few things, and then, staff can present what we're looking at. Legally, there's a few bodies that can bring zoning amendments forward. And so the planning board is one and the town manager is one. And so the idea would be, does the planning board support, like Jeff said, this bundle of technical fixes, or does it come from the town manager? Can the planning board give direction to the subcommittee and say, yeah, report back to us every meeting on these 2 zoning amendments you're really going to be working on over the next 3 months? And so the planning board would set aside time at their meetings or 1 meeting a month to say, okay, we're really going to look at, say, this new development method. We're going to look at this, we're going to look at this other change. Maybe it's the PRP zoning. And so those are the 2 elements that the subcommittee is really going to then focus on. So yeah, I don't necessarily have, I don't think we have to look at the whole list, but I think some of it would be, over the next, 2 items, how do we talk about it? In terms of the housing production plan, was recently adopted. It was sent to the state for approval. And we'd always said that we'd like to meet with the Housing Trust and maybe the CRC and kind of talk about, well, how do we work together to implement some of those strategies and objectives? And so it was on the agenda tonight just to have the planning board kind of refresh ourselves and not necessarily make decisions tonight, knowing that, probably in the next month or 2, we'd meet with the Housing Trust and say, okay, well, who's working on what? And so, does the planning board stick within the lane of trying to do land use regulations, and does the trust work on other implementation strategies that might have to do more with financing or outreach? But or do we kind of share some responsibilities? And the trust, for instance, could look at a zoning amendment, right? They might say they really are interested in changing inclusionary zoning or something. And so just kind of having that conversation in the next 1 to 2 months. And so I think housing is a big deal. We talk about it a lot. And so really, with this plan, kind of how do we really implement some of those strategies in the plan, because they're broad, right? So they talk about infill development, but they don't talk about what is the actual regulation that changes to do that? What's the missing middle housing? Is it 8 to 12 units? Is it 12 to 20 units? Is it just putting apartments everywhere in town, or is it more nuanced? And so the plan doesn't, gives us the direction, but it doesn't really tell us the mechanics of getting it done. And that's kind of where the conversation could go. And maybe we find one amendment we want the planning board or staff to work on, in the next 6 months from that.
Okay, I see no hands. It is now 8:01 on my clock. We usually take a break around now. Jeff, have you heard what you were hoping to hear tonight? Should we end your agenda item and move on after our break?
I think that would be great. I appreciate that. And I appreciate, kind of, just to reiterate, I did watch a lot of meetings, since my process started in May. I have some familiarity, but hearing directly from you guys is great. And I think Nate and I should be getting back together, and I would like to look at the list. And if I heard it correctly, some items to address student housing are missing. But then maybe we look at this list and help prioritize it and put them together so that there's like a flow as to how some of these things could get accomplished over a period of 1 to 2 or 3 years. And then I think really looking at what the housing production plan adds in and aligning that, and then finally kind of how the town manager goals fit into this. So maybe that's something that Nate and I can work on and provide an updated document for your next meeting, just for you guys to keep considering this. but I do really appreciate all the tremendous amount of time that you guys have all invested in this. And um, I'm here. I probably won't attend every meeting, but I do want you to know that collectively we all want to start swimming in the same direction. So that's a sort of a primary goal here is to have that happen.
All right. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Nate.
All right. Time is 8:03. Why don't we take a 5-minute break? Try to come back at 8:08 or right around that time. All right. Please turn on your camera as you return so that we know you are back. Looks like we lost Johanna and Bruce. And Fred, I do see your hand.
I just have something for Pam. It's not really part of the meeting. If,
Well, you want to do it with all of us present, or?
no, it doesn't. It's Pam, it's regarding that text for the November minutes. During the break, I attached it to a reply to one of your emails. So you should have the text.
Thank you so much, Fred. That's so helpful. I
Sure.
appreciate it.
All right. So, and now Bruce and Johanna are back, so we're all together. All right. Time on my clock is 8:12. We'll go ahead with the next item on the agenda. Number 4, which was discussion of the housing production plan. It sounds like specifically the implementation matrix. Nate, did you want to introduce that?
Sure, I'll share my screen in a minute. I mean, I kind of summarized it before the break, but I think, there's a lot to the plan. And, the planning board, we had been involved at various stages with the consultants and reviewed this. And I thought it would be good just to look at it again, knowing that in the next few months, maybe we could, develop another priority from this list. And so, maybe there's already something on our zoning priority list, but maybe there's something else that jumps out from this implementation matrix and discussions with the housing trust or in the CRC. So, yeah, I think that's it. And, maybe it's things that aren't zoning related, right? It could be other things that the planning board is interested in, whether it's, financing option or some other piece of that, whether it's, public outreach or certain kinds of engagement with stakeholders. And so I just think it was good to include this in the packet, and, we could walk through it a little bit, but, if there's any questions or comments now, we could have a conversation. I don't really have any goals out of it. I don't, I'm not, to me, everything there is a kind of a priority. It's really then deciding how do we, which ones are the one we start with first. And so that's
Well,
all.
did you want to bring it up and put it on the screen, or?
Oh, sorry. This is I think this was under the conversation with Jeff. This is, every year the town, with the budget, it summarizes departments. And so we had something with the planning department. And I just wanted to highlight that, we typically have objectives every year and then upcoming things to work on. And so it kind of strengthens what Jeff was saying. There's East Amherst, there's downtown, possibly North Amherst, ADUs, and downtown design standards. And so there's every year as part of the budget process, departments review this list and add things to it. And so, it gets folded into, we can use this to help, guide the planning staff and the planning board. Jesse, I see your hand.
Yep, Jesse, and then Bruce.
Thanks. I don't want to be a broken record, but since you're bringing up these sort of larger goals again, I have to ask you, Nate, does the word student ever come up in staff conversations or in town manager conversations? Like again, it really frustrates me that this is a constant theme where we see like the housing production plan, we see these goals, we see summary of objectives, and it's never part of the conversation, at least written. So I don't need to go into it in detail, but you just say yes or no. Yes, that's something staff talk about, the town manager talk about, the counselors talk about. Like, I'm really curious, and it feels a little defeating if it's not.
So the answer is yes. At the staff level, and I'm assuming with the town manager and even conversations with UMass, I think, as Jeff mentioned, there's so many facets to that piece, right? And it's hard through zoning typically to address that. And so the town's been doing other things, right? Like the rental registration and now rental enforcement. We've talked about parking standards. So yeah, it is. And I feel like, especially with the housing production plan, it's kind of emphasized the need to look at it some more. And so, Bruce said he's kind of had this shift, this idea about what are the expectations from the university and maybe the colleges. But I think, also with the research that was done in the other, university communities across the country, it is difficult because legislation in Massachusetts might regulate things differently. So we can't say have a student home as easily as other states. But, I think we've had more recent conversations with state folks and others. And so, I think there's, more to come in the next few months. I think there's ideas that staff have talked about, and they may not go anywhere, right? But, so I think there is. It's a really hard thing to address through zoning. And so, at some point it's like, well, do we just try it?
I completely
a few
agree.
years ago, so anyways, it is part of the conversation, but typically we don't, in any of these goals, we don't mention other demographics, right? It's just, we mention housing supply.
Sorry, I have to push back a little. There's talk about missing middle, there's talk about affordable, there's talk about starter homes. Those are speaking about specific demographics, not a specific socioeconomic class or whatever, but they are. In the same way we could be talking about student living situations, which I think we're all pro-student, that's part of our town. And it just to me, it has to be part of the conversation always. And I know it's difficult, but I feel like we're ignoring it in so many ways. Okay, sorry, I'll shut up.
No, that's great to hear, because like implicitly may not cut it anymore, right? We have to be a little more transparent about mentioning student housing. I see two other hands.
Yep.
I was going to try to actually
I just want to make sure you guys were done.
Well,
All right, Bruce.
I'm just going to keep right on going because I feel the same thing. We've got this now. You put these lists up, so that's why you're getting hammered by me and from Jesse. It's up there, and there's no goddamn mention of it. And if we've got a town where we've got 13,000 residents and we've got an additional 9,000 who are students looking for housing in the town, how can it not be an overwhelming problem? It should be almost the only damn thing on the list, because it's such an intractable problem. And to wallow around and say whatever was said about how maybe it's not our business and all this kind of stuff, it can't not be our business. You've got to figure out a way, and it's got to be there. It's got to be there. Otherwise, hell, I'm not. Why am I bothering? Why am I bothering? That's it for me.
Great, Bruce. Angus.
I'll maybe take a softer stance, and just say, I agree that I think it would be helpful for the in the budget planning document that we're looking at here to explicitly mention student housing. That being said, I don't know. It seems like we need to be driving more of that conversation. as well. And we are working on different things, but I'm not sure what specifically Nate should put on that list that would deal with student housing. He could put a general objective, just continue to work on student housing, right? Conversations with UMass. The housing production plan, I will point out on D1, does explicitly mention student housing, so that the housing production plan is aware of this concern and is noted. I'll express maybe a bit of disagreement with Jesse's idea, though. I'm not sure that having either the planning department or us as a board pursue trying to limit student rentals in neighborhoods isn't a great use of our time, nor do I think it'll solve the underlying problem, which is just that UMass has a bunch of students that need housing. And so I would not want to support trying to get the planning department to put a whole lot of energy into that particular solution, which I just don't see as dealing with the root problem, which is the students need houses.
All right, Jara.
I had my thoughts together, and then Bruce spoke, and then Angus spoke. I think, Nate, that this is just like a reflection of what I was talking about earlier. There's no visible plan or leadership in terms of addressing the housing crisis that people are facing in Amherst, and student housing competition is inherently a part of that. I don't know if there needs to be something in this document under key challenges and long range objectives that specifically says students, though I totally hear you, Jesse, that you're like banging your head against the wall right now. But the point is, I know I'm feeling frustrated. I know clearly other members on the board are feeling frustrated that it feels like there isn't some clear leadership on this and a clear plan. It's great that Jeff is on board now, and now I feel more confidence that we are going in that direction. And of course, this was put together before Jeff. So I guess that's really my only comment. I guess I think that this is just a reflection of people's frustration, that it feels like nobody's actually paying enough attention and picking up the ball and taking a leadership role on this, and somebody needs to.
Sure, thanks. Just to say that, this is a budget that was developed last year, and so this process is starting again. So, thanks for this, because I can go back to Jeff and say, and he was here tonight. I don't know if he's listening, but right, there has to be some, we can, this is happening right now for the next year's budget. So it's good to have this feedback. And shame on me for having the wrong tab open when I share my screen. No, and I hear you, because you can, we have a catalog of previous reports, and when there's the one from 1991 where like Governor Dukakis or whatever has funded something about student housing in college communities across Massachusetts, and it's like it says the same thing that we've been talking about, and it's been going on almost 40 years. It's like, well, something has to change, because they knew it was a problem, or something to address decades ago, and so it's
Well,
right.
Okay, so as long as we're all going to pile on here, I'm gonna take it in a slightly different direction. We can wait for Nate or Jeff to take leadership on this, or we can, each of us show up with, here's what we think we should do. We could try to develop a consensus on the board, and then lead the conversation, with CRC or council. If we think that we should allow, a 10-story tower in the neighborhood, some neighborhood adjacent to UMass that would house 2,000 students and have a noticeable effect on the market, we could do that. We could put that into writing and recommend it to council. I mean, there's lots of different physical solutions we could all talk about. So I just feel like we're being a little unfair to Nate and Jeff to look to them and not consider what we could do. And that prompted at least 3 of us to put our hands up. So okay, let's keep going. I thought we had a light agenda tonight, but I can see it's going to be a long night. Jesse, you're next.
Thanks. I completely agree, Doug. But the few times we've done that, it's gotten nowhere at council level. And I don't know if that's because we were off the mark. I don't know if that's because Jeff or
Well,
Tom is not supporting it. And like we just heard tonight, we've been working a long time on this North Hermann's overlay idea. We haven't heard once from anyone in town that we don't think that's viable. It's also strange to me because we're not making it happen. We're allowing it to happen. If it doesn't happen, so what?
Right.
Why would we kill it now? Maybe 3 years from now, someone will take the opportunity. But my point is really what I was trying to ask Jeff the very first time, and maybe he's not the right person to ask, is there appetite for this in his mind, in town manager's mind, like for any of this student housing discussion? Because that's what I don't see. And again, maybe, and I agree with you, Angus, maybe planning board is not the right place for this to happen in these other ways. Maybe it's not in our purview to think about regulating, limiting, all this other kind of stuff. I don't know. But someone needs to do it. And if I should get off of here and go to a different committee or just be public commenting everywhere,
you shouldn't get off the board. No. I mean, I'm personally in kind of the same position that Angus is, that I don't think it's worth, I don't think it's a
but I would like to know that if that's what the board thinks, because that's what I spend most of my time in this, that I have for this, thinking about. So if we collectively think these are not the right things for planning board, I really want to know that. And I won't be mad about it, but I do want to know that because I will stop trying to make it happen here.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's an important discussion that we need to have, actually.
Okay. Angus?
Yeah, I think that's I don't know if that would be a good thing possibly for a future meeting, because I think we probably all need to do some more thinking about that. I think it could be a worthwhile thing for us as a board to discuss, whether pursuing some kind of I guess a limitation strategy or a spacing strategy, right, in residential neighborhoods to try and get better distance and reduce the number of student rentals. I think that's something that we should probably talk about as a board, because I think Jesse's right. We if we agree with that strategy as a group, then that's something that we need to pursue. And if it's not, then it's something that we probably shouldn't pursue. I was going to suggest actually maybe us moving to the next agenda item, which is general housing discussion, because it feels like the HPP itself is more of a background thing that'll help us inform our discussion of general housing and the zoning priorities list that we started looking at earlier. But I don't want to tread on your toes, Doug.
Oh, they're barely. They're not my toes, but let's go to Jara and Nate. Then we'll get to you, and you can comment on whether you're okay with us jumping around like Angus is suggesting. Jara?
Yeah. Well, Doug, I appreciate your point about, us taking some initiative on that leadership and giving some direction. I genuinely love that idea. I feel like we're hopefully representatives of this community and can, serve as one point of view from that perspective. But when I was talking about leadership, I mean like the town and the schools, because ultimately, we don't have the land, the resources, or the authority to do anything. Well, not anything. So in my job, I often go to different communities and I try to figure out all the different assets and all the different major players that are in the housing development ecosystem. And I try to figure out what assets those particular communities have and how they might be able to better utilized to meet the housing needs of that community. I see tremendous assets here in the schools and in the town. And I mean, I'll try not to go down a soapbox here. But what frustrates me is that if we're serious about addressing the economic and housing challenges that kids and young adults are facing right now, then we need to all work together and we need to do things differently. We can't keep playing in our own little sandbox or accepting that, oh, this would never happen or that would never happen. That's just going to be status quo solutions for status quo results. And the places where I have seen the most progress in my work supporting affordable housing is the places where the organizations get together in a room and have conversations, figure out their shared goals, and come up with a plan to use their shared resources in order to achieve those shared goals. And I don't see any of that here, and it's driving me nuts. And that's totally common, that absence is very common in most of the communities that I work in. But Amherst is so well resourced, it's foolish to me that we are not seeing more open discussion and leadership from the powers that determine our lives on a regular basis. They're just ignoring the housing crisis that we're all experiencing. They're ignoring the economic challenges that kids are trying to get hired today. Okay, I said I wasn't going to go on a soapbox. I won't anymore. I'll get off. My point is, I guess I'm calling for leadership. I would really love for the people who have the authority to make some meaningful impact on the housing and economic development of this town to get together in a room and to really have a conversation and come up with a plan about how they can work together to make effective change. I'll stop there.
Okay. All right. In that case, Nate, finally around to you.
Oh, sure, that's fine. Yeah, no, this is good. I'll tell Jeff to watch the rest of the meeting on his own time. Yeah, I mean, so we can move on. I don't, like I said, I didn't have a strict, agenda for the housing production plan. It was really just, I'd encourage the board members to look at it. There's, 50 odd implementation strategies, under a few big themes. I hear what you're saying about students because they really impact the housing market. And I guess, I agree, because I think what becomes a hindrance is, we could say yeah, we want to do, small scale development on residential properties. And then the concern is oh, well, that's just going to become student rentals. And out of that fear, we don't make a zoning change, or we don't make any changes. And then if we try to do something big, like another overlay, that doesn't move forward either. And so then there isn't a lot of, right, as Jerry, you just said, it's kind of this stasis. And so, we're looking at East Amherst, and when the planning board talked about East Amherst a few years ago, we said, well, let's look at University Drive, because, its proximity to UMass and its kind of general character made it a priority. And, people had said, well, the problem with East Amherst, if we densify it, do we really want that to become where there's a lot of students and then they're commuting across town? Does that make the most sense? And so, I remember in some CRC meetings, everyone said, this is great. Let's redevelop East Amherst, and we'll have families and young professionals living there. And it's well, we will get some, but it may not be what people envision if we're not addressing other parts of the housing equation. And so, but going back to the housing production plan implementation matrix, just let's keep it in mind for the next meeting. Okay, what are some strategies the board would want to undertake? And maybe Doug and Jara, right? Maybe it's a memo to the town manager and town council with some of the things that were said tonight. I mean, maybe that's, and it fits into one of those implementation strategies of how do we kind of change that. There's one about changing the conversation. And so is that maybe a priority for the planning board? It's not zoning related necessarily yet, but it's something that, we can say, look, here's kind of couched in some of these ideas and in this plan, in the comprehensive housing policy of the council. And so we want to actually, we'll talk about it a few times and we'll try to generate something. And maybe we have ideas within the memo, right? A few different things. What does that mean? Like you said, Jared, type of meetings or some transparency or something. And so to me, that's a priority that comes out of this, right? We've talked about it a lot. We talked about it tonight. And so I'm thinking that that's something we say is a priority out of this evening. What form it takes, I'm not sure yet, but yeah. So we can move on. Yeah, and I'd still like to revisit the HPP matrix in the next part of the discussion, or knowing that maybe in March or sometime we'll meet with the Housing Trust and we can really kind of jump into some details there. So that's it.
All right, Angus.
Yeah, I'll just keep it brief. I think, most of what we're talking about here, especially around students and getting our academic partners more engaged, is in part D of the housing production plan. And D1 is encourage the development of more student and workforce housing. And we're listed along with the planning department as taking the lead responsibility. But the next 4 points continue to strengthen town-gown relationships and update strategic agreements with academic partners to invest in community services, identify discrete housing strategies with academic partners, revamp the dialogue and perception around student housing and presence, help senior residents and residents, thanks, Nate. But D1 through 5 are all things that the planning department should be taking a key role in. And I think what you're hearing from us, Nate, is that when y'all do get around to doing key challenges, long-range objectives for this coming year, we would encourage you all to really put those 5 things up in there. And I think the planning board, a lot of that, those D2, 3, 4, and D1 and 4, we can also be involved in, and we are trying to be involved in. And so I think we can work cooperatively with y'all. But I just wanted to bring our attention to that, because as we shift to actual housing strategies, this stuff is not, apart from D1, is not going to be as strong a part of our discussion.
All right, Jesse.
Just quickly to point out, I appreciate that, Angus, but also A1 through 9 and half of B and C1 through 7 are all planning board taking the lead. So it's a lot. so like, yeah, it's there. But again, in my mind, the weight of the priority, well, there's not a real priority listed here, but the way these all get discussed, for the most part, the priorities are out of whack to me to make any meaningful impact in any short time frame. And Jara, I completely agree with your sentiments as well.
Okay. All right, Nate, or did you want to go through this?
No, not necessarily. It was in the packet. I think, I agree. So part of the plan is we kind of have to have this matrix and identify responsible entities and a timeline. And so, I agree that some of them, it says planning board, maybe is, town staff, or it could be the planning department or town manager. And I think that can all be, I think that could be communicated. No, I mean, I think right. So there's just a lot here. And so, I'd ask the board for next time just to, maybe pick out 3 that you think are worthwhile to pursue, and we can have the conversation and see where there's overlap between, maybe the goals of the town manager and the housing and zoning subcommittee, and, is there something that we pull out of this that isn't on the list? That's all. We don't have to necessarily.
I mean, I was going to suggest the same thing, that we each pick some small number of these points and communicate them as our thoughts of priority, and then we can see where there's shared interest and let that develop the priority for the board.
Sure. Yep.
Do you want us to just send you our top 3?
Yeah, I mean, it could be
between now and 5 days before the next meeting, so you can put it all in a matrix and tell us who voted, where the votes were.
Sure. I mean, it could be like 3 to 5, but yeah, I mean, try to narrow it down, and otherwise, like, we're not, we don't make any headway if we're.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And this would be anything on the list, category A, B,
right.
C, or D, or E.
Right.
Okay. So that's a bit of homework for everybody. Johanna,
And then just to be clear, the thing that you are asking is what do you think the planning board and the planning department should be prioritizing in the immediate term or like in 2026 in addition to the downtown, like in addition to the things that have already been identified?
Right, yeah, so maybe it's the same, and maybe there is one other strategy or zoning change that we think could be, worked on this year while we're doing these other things. So yeah, I mean, really come up with out of this matrix, 2 or 3 priorities, and maybe one gets worked on this year and the other 2 are next year, but at least to start figuring out how we implement it, right? How we actually take that strategy and bring it forward. Because like I said, some of them are kind of generic. And so, is it a specific zoning amendment? Is it this memo encouraging things and maybe follow-up memos? Is it, whatever it may be. And so, yeah, so it's really, because that zoning list didn't just, didn't generate from this housing production plan. This was things that the board had mentioned over a number of meetings, that staff had mentioned. And like I said, it's just a compilation of things that it really hasn't been given a strong priority or, hasn't been vetted very well. It's just, so, right, come up with your 3 to 5, email me. Maybe there's 2 or 3 we say we'll move forward on and we put a timeline on them. And maybe one is this year.
so we should be drawing not just from this housing production plan matrix.
No.
We can also draw from your zoning ideas list.
Let's just stick with the housing production plan matrix for the homework.
Okay.
And maybe after the next discussion, then there's a second homework assignment, your top 2 from the zoning priority list.
Okay.
I don't want to confuse them just because it'd be nice to.
Yeah, and I don't want to get it too confused either. Okay. All right. All right, I'm going to consider that kind of the end of the item number 4. And then we'll go to the general housing discussion if there's anything left to say. But I do want to offer our public attendees a chance to comment on what we've talked about so far. I'm wondering, we have still 7 attendees. Do any of you want to make a comment about this general topic, whether it's the zoning priorities, whether it's the housing production plan, or housing in general? I'm not seeing any hands. Maybe everybody just wants to listen tonight. All right, well, we'll keep going and maybe ask again later. General housing discussion. So the time now is 8:42, if it matters that we're transitioning to that topic. Do we have anything left to say tonight? I'm not asking because I don't want to hear anymore. Bruce.
Well, I took the trouble to put together a reaction to the discussion we had, and I thought it was on the planning board, but it might have been in the subcommittee, about the 40Y starter housing idea, and the conversation that I participated in had started with I think Alex and Nate, and certainly I as well, looked at it's probably not there. It's the I'm now switching to support Pam. I think it was the document that you sent around subsequently today that I'm speaking to.
Yeah.
Yep, there it is.
That's it.
It's
Yes.
in the packet as well.
Oh, it is as well. So where was I? So the conversation began with the 40Y, continued with the notion that the 40Y is actually a fairly heavy-handed piece of state legislation, and you know, and like other such 40 things like 40B and so forth, there's a fairly laborious process in engaging it. And the thought was, could we do something just with our own bylaw that affected the broad intent of 40Y? And if we could, how might we go about it? And the first thought that I had anyway was, well, we could basically move in the direction that the farmland protection overlay dealt in, where you basically take you could create a subdivision. You could basically amend the subdivision regulations in some way, and then use overlays, as we have done, by identifying certain parcels. And this is the way the farmland protection conservation farmland protection worked. It identified 7 or 8 farms about 30 years ago, put overlays on each of them, and then designated that they had to be developed in a certain way using cluster. And so the thought was maybe we could do something similar to create 40, essentially 40Y type zones or geographic areas. Discussion then continued to suggest, well, maybe we shouldn't approach this as an overlay approach. Maybe we should simply modify the bylaw in some way. And then it occurred to me, I think that, or others, that the section 4.3 of the bylaw, which is the cluster zoning, the cluster subdivision approach, could work. The way it works in our bylaw at the moment is that you take a large parcel and you enable through this portion of the bylaw contracted standards, so a few amount of roads, smaller lots, and so forth. So you can concentrate development in a portion of a larger parcel. And the thought that I had was, well, maybe we could adopt something similar, but instead of collapsing the entitled development into a smaller portion, you could allow a threefold bonus for the whole parcel. But if you, in return for that, would require limit the construction of the houses on these smaller lots to a smaller size, and the idea being that if you were producing a lot of smaller lots with a lot of smaller houses, that would just result in less expensive housing. So this is not affordable so much that it's got the capital A and quotation marks and so forth, although we could have an inclusionary requirement into this sort of thing. But I should have actually prefaced this thing by saying that the interest in this approach was supposed to be kind of complementary with the North Amherst overlay approach, or some initiative that we were taking that would be purely focused on greatly increasing the capacity to develop and provide student housing. And this was seen as a complementary initiative that would be very differently focused on starter housing, affordable housing, workforce housing, and so forth, so that we would somehow inure or inoculate ourselves against the heavy-handed criticism from folks who would say, you're only interested in student housing and blah, blah, blah. And we could say, no, well, we're interested in all of this. And this would be the evidence of an initiative that was completely not student housing. And the question, of course, is whether you could put as well as a house size limitation, you could put an ownership limitation and so forth. And so I wrote it all out and put it out there as an idea that I thought we could consider. And I think that's enough. I think I've basically summarized what's there, but I did look through the whole of section 4.3 and figure out to some degree how it could be. You'd have to keep 4.3. We'd have to keep this cluster provision as it is, because it's an important complement to the farmland protection section of our bylaw. It basically describes how the farmland it has to be is supposed to be developed. So this is important. It's not something that we should just change. We would have to add, but it could be the model for adding. And the question, essentially, to me, it seems, is could we successfully limit house size? And my thought was that notionally we should be able to, because if we're making a giving, so to speak, by adding twice, 3 times, or whatever, as many lots, that we could have some complementary limitation that reduced house size, and it seemed to be a fair and reasonable thing. But of course, the proof would be in an opinion, I guess, from the AG's office. I should stop there. I just wanted to say
Yeah,
that,
I mean,
that
Bruce,
we put this down.
this is interesting. I guess given, you know, another way to control house size would be to use the kind of thing we've already got, which is the proportion of lot coverage. And if we're allowing smaller lots, that would generate the range of house size that's allowable on those smaller lots.
Doug, I don't think so. The evidence of that is the Barkowski Meadows subdivision and the subsequent Coles Lane, where much smaller lots were created, but equivalently huge houses were built on those small lots. So just up the road in my backyard is the evidence that doesn't necessarily follow.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm not as familiar with that. And is it possible that the percentages and the factors that were in play at the time were just more generous than you might want to do now?
That's possible. It's true that I haven't really done the math on this.
Yeah.
I've worked on just my instincts based on years of experience, but probably the next step, particularly once you found out that it's worth doing the math, which is to say that this general concept, this general proposition has legs in that you can limit house size, and if we find out that's a defensible proposition, then we could sit down and do the math on this. And the reason I went to Cinda and talked to Cinda Jones was because she does a lot of subdivisional work, or at least her family did, Paul particularly. I thought I could get a reading from her on that, but unfortunately I couldn't. The conversation just with Cinda just went exploded into all sorts of possible things around the town and so forth. So I wasn't able to focus the conversation enough. But in principle, she seemed to think this was a good idea. She questioned whether this would whether you should have a permanent limit on house size, or whether you would say after a certain period of time you would allow a homeowner to biggerize their house. I said, well, you know, the first step in biggerization here is the state law related to ADUs. Every one of these small houses can build an ADU. There's nothing we can do about that. So that's the first step. And her concern was, well, do you want to stop people from, you know, from growing their wealth, so to speak, generationally? And she was concerned that we shouldn't do anything that would too unreasonably limit that. And I think that's an interesting point. But I did think that the ADU protected the ADU would probably be a line that would safeguard that concern. But
all right.
math needs
Jared.
to be done.
Bruce, I just want to say this is such a creative idea. I love the idea of trying to replicate this tool within our existing bylaw, because you're worried that the new tool might be too complicated for people to take advantage of.
Yes, that was Angus's and Nate's concern, I think.
Yeah, that's a really, I love this idea. I guess 2 questions that I have is, aren't there some other like incentives related to 40Y? Like, I'm curious, what are the trade-offs of doing a local version versus a 40Y overlay? And I'm also curious, and Nate, this is maybe more of a question for you. You
This
know,
is
what
for
you
Nate.
think. Yeah, and then how you feel like that article that you shared with us earlier this week plays into this discussion of starter homes.
Nate,
Sure.
this is for you.
Yeah, I think so. Just to say that this is the number two on the subcommittee list, and so I think some of this is coming to the planning board. For the board to say yes, subcommittee and staff work on this, and give ourselves a timeline and say, okay, we want to actually move this forward as a zoning amendment, right? So whether it's a new development method in the bylaw, section 4 point whatever 7, 6, call it traditional neighborhood subdivision, we come up with we could model it after the cluster, but it has its own, it's applied that way. So it's different than an overlay, right? We'd say, on lots, we could have criteria on lots greater than 5 acres in these zoning districts. This is allowed by site plan review, and it's a subdivision method with some permitting to get there. I think, Jared, what 40Y does, there's a financial incentive in terms of how many units more, the net increase between the 40Y and the underlying zoning. It's not a big payment. Some communities might see that as something. I think what 40Y does, it does place a size limit on the house. It requires at least 50% to be 3 bedrooms, and it has a few other kind of conditions or requirements that typically aren't found in zoning. And so, to me, I'm not sure that we could regulate size by simply saying you can't have more than 1,500 square feet. Typically, we do that through dimensional standards, whether it's the setbacks or, as Doug mentioned, lot coverage and building coverage. And so what 40Y is doing is it's blending a number of things. And so to do a 40Y, essentially it's a subdivision, right? So the subdivision is the creation of a road and lots. And Bruce and I talked today about this. It's ironic because typically the person who does that may not be developing every lot, right? They might sell the lots. And so then a different contractor is building a number of homes, and then they get sold, and then the homeowner might not even realize that there's a size restriction, and then they put an addition on. And so what 40Y is, the state is saying, is we really want to try to create, they call it starter home, small home. Mansfield is calling it a multi-generational overlay, but they're basically coming up with a kind of tweaks the subdivision method, site plan review, and then design standards and housing standards all in one kind of overlay. And they're trying to get it all done at once. And so, it's great. I think, towns are starting to realize it's been on the books for a bit, but they're now trying to figure out how to actually write the zoning to make it work. Like Bruce said, we found it to be kind of heavy-handed and maybe not necessary. And so I don't know if there's actually a detriment if we don't use a 40Y. I think we could try to take from it what we like and from other parts of our bylaw or other ideas and create this new development method. I think what we may not be able to do, what Bruce was saying, is actually have an explicit limit on housing size. I think that's yet to be tested. Typically, zoning doesn't get to that kind of that level. So, but for instance, to the 5,000 square foot lot thing, to me, in our outlying residential areas, right, you might have a 10-acre property, and right now you get, 8 house lots. And given the cost of infrastructure of everything, and then is that really the best use of it? Or could we say, if this were, if this method were in place, could they get maybe 20 house lots? And because of that, the homes are smaller. Is it just that they're more affordable? They're not capitally affordable. They could be, but the idea is just to generate kind of different housing types, different opportunities. And so for me, it's like, I would think if planning board, if we think this is a good idea, then sure, let's have the subcommittee really work on this and say, okay, let's come up with a timeline to try to actually get language down as a zoning amendment, and talk about this every other meeting or something to move it along. So I do think it has legs. I think it's a really great idea. I think there's a lot of details to be worked out. So,
all right, Angus.
As someone on the Housing and Zoning Subcommittee, I think it's a great idea for us to look into this. I also think that, to Doug's point, so the 40Y places an upper limit of 1,850 square feet for a house. So to be a starter home and qualify for the 40Y, that's the maximum square footage. It's in heated space. So I think to Doug's point, there might be a way to give the option of small enough lot sizes but set a maximum building coverage that would still get us somewhere around there. But the lots could potentially be pretty small if that's the case, which could be fine. I mean, I was just in Texas over the December break, and we drove by so many subdivisions that had almost no yards, and it was almost entirely house. And the houses were not huge. Some of the subdivisions were, but some of the houses were quite small, actually, 3-bedroom houses. So anyway, I think there might be ways for us to do it, but I think that's something for the Housing and Zoning Subcommittee to work on.
Jesse?
Thanks. Just to add one more point that came up in our subcommittee discussion for those who weren't there, and anyone correct me if I'm wrong, the 40Y was designed and makes a lot more sense if you have a big lot that you're going to split up in this way. And so we had a hard time imagining more than 1 or 2 locations in our town that would work. That might work. But then I think part of what drove Bruce in this direction was thinking, how can we make something that could be one single big lot and someone wants to make 5 houses on it? That, it doesn't have to be one spot in the town. These could pop up here and there wherever a builder and owner felt like it was appropriate as a way to infill with smaller starter homes.
And if I could just add to that, if you just Google Mansfield MA 40Y, you can see their work to create this 40Y district, and it is an incredibly heavy administrative lift and lift for their planning board to undertake. It's really incredible the resources they have there. They've done a good job, but they're identifying a pretty large tract of land to try and do it on, and we as Jesse said, we ran into walls. And imagining doing that kind of 40Y 5 times across town would be pretty unmanageable.
Well, so one question I have is whether you really need to limit it to these larger parcels, like this 5-acre parcel. If I have 2 acres, which is 80,000 square feet, or even my ½ acre, which is 20,000 square feet. Well, theoretically I could get 4 little houses on that with just a long driveway to get, subdivision road to give access to each one. I guess that would be one question I would have is would we be willing to let this apply to smaller parcels so that we're not automatically limiting this to undeveloped land? Because I'd rather see us retain I'd rather see us redevelop some of the land that's already built on and make it denser if there's a way to do that. All right, my 2 cents. Nate and then Bruce.
Sure, I was going to say I will send the Mansfield 40Y zoning. So after they did all this work, the actual zoning language is pretty straightforward. Some of it is that they're backed by state regulation, right? So they can make some references, but the actual zoning amendment is 3 pages. And it's not, I feel like our cluster development method in our bylaw is a few pages and it's kind of cumbersome and wordy. Mansfield's taking the approach of just writing kind of straightforward, simple zoning language, and I'll send it around. So I think it is achievable to, have kind of this, this change in our bylaw. Doug, to your point, I think the idea is that these are fee simple lots and it's part of a subdivision. Not that we can't do it on a smaller lot, but say we call this traditional neighborhood subdivision. In the housing production plan, they talk about cottage style development, which to me is, it may not be fee simple. It could be, a condominiumized property that allows multiple units on a smaller property. And so, your approach could work. Would someone really go through the effort of creating a small subdivision road to create to service 4 lots? And do they really then, are they fee simple? Like, could they actually meet the requirements we might have? And so maybe, I just, I think it's a good question to
I
ask.
think that's worth thinking about, at least for a few minutes.
Right.
I mean, I'm coming from where I stand. I have a half-acre lot. I already could put an ADU on it. I mean, if you told me, and I'm within walking distance of town, so and bike riding distance of the university, so I mean, is that something we would like to see? I mean, it would mean tearing down the house I'm in now, but I'm not particularly attached to it. Do the numbers work? I don't know, but okay, Bruce.
Just to say that I think we should look into that. The reason that the 5-acre parcel or larger is in there is simply taken from the existing 4.30 cluster bylaw. So it's not really something that's been thought about. It's simply appropriated without thought. So I think it would be a good exercise for us, and maybe a really key and interesting question for us to look at the two takeaways that I've gotten for this. There's probably more because I've written a lot, but the ones that spring to mind right now are to see how we can limit house size, as you suggested, Doug, and Nate, by limiting, but by being aggressive with the dimensional standard for building or lot building coverage. And then secondly, to look about how this thing could be applied to parcels of 1 acre or less. And would they be subdivisions, or would they be some kind of version of the OSCD or some other thing that we would basically enable a very small parcel to be redeveloped in a kind of a cottage style or a whatever style housing? Where would we imagine that we would refine part of the subdivision bylaw to allow these to be very small fee simple lots, frontage generated on a driveway that went up the middle of let's say, 1 acre lot? I mean, I don't know, but I think those two are very interesting questions, and see whether we might not be able to figure out how to do this with modifying the bylaw, rather than perhaps necessarily looking at engaging the state 40Y. But at some point, we might find out that trying to wrestle this pig to the ground, it keeps slipping out, and it ends up that the 40Y actually is better than the pig that we couldn't wrestle to the ground. But let's see if we can get this pig pinned down, because it might be fun to do.
That might be my favorite Bruce metaphor.
So far. Jesse.
Thanks. Yeah, I totally support pursuing this idea. I was thinking not exactly the same, but already on McClellan that I go by daily, there's a stretch of houses which feel that way already. I think they have got there that way somehow by building up a garage to a second unit or whatever. But the point is, they're pretty small lots with multiple small structures on them. And so that kind of density, I think, is great for our town. So I would very much like to pursue this.
All right, Angus.
Maybe Jared should go next. I was gonna this is Bruce's kind of hobby horse that he's pursuing in the subcommittee, and I was gonna talk about my hobby horse, but I can go after Jared.
I think it's a greased pig, so Jared.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to echo that I think this is a great idea. I would, like, harkening back to the very beginning of our conversation with Jeff today, I would recommend that the subcommittee members who are investigating this talk to subdivision developers, talk to Valley CDC, talk to Habitat, talk to whoever is building single family homes, and see if this is something that would be appealing to them. Would they actually pursue properties, subdivide them, And would this allow them to build homes in a way that would allow them to sell them lowercase a affordably? Because I love this idea. I don't want us to invest a bunch of time in a tool that's not, actually appealing to anybody who would do this.
All right, Jira, back to you, Angus.
Yeah, that actually prompts one quick question about this, which is I know that Sarah Barr came and spoke to our subcommittee meeting, I think last week, or no, I'm sorry, maybe a month ago. But anyway, to say that Amherst College is trying to think about workforce housing for staff, a little bit for faculty as well, but especially for staff. So I guess my question, just prompted by Jara's thought, do these, with a cluster development, do the lots then have to be sold to someone? Or could ownership be retained by whoever developed the site?
Nate, do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, so it could be retained, and so the idea is it's a subdivision method to create a roadway and then frontage lots, and so you know the ownership of the lots is really not
Not
part of
addressed.
the permitting, like we don't specify that, and so 40Y does get a little bit into the ownership, so
Right.
typically we wouldn't, and so yeah, no, I think it's a good question. Along those lines, I was going to say, I think what we might need to change the subdivision regulations, because the idea is that we'd also then want maybe narrower roads, and not a 50-foot diameter, 100-foot diameter paved circle at the end of a cul-de-sac for a turnaround.
Right,
So
right.
some of this
Right.
would also maybe involve changing the subdivision regs. And so yeah, I think let's we can pursue this. We can come up with different ideas of how this could work. And I think what I like to do is try to work on this a little bit more. And I think to your point, Jara, then ask, shop this around a little bit and say, okay, we kind of have our standards, lot sizes, whatever, staff or the subcommittee could take a few properties, kind of do a concept, and then approach developers or organizations and say, does this make sense? Is this because it is expensive to put a roadway in, and there's a process to that, but is it a new way to get fee simple lots? Because some of the other strategies I feel like that we've been pursuing, and often what the zoning has, is like, it's either a single family home or it's an 80-unit mixed use building, and there hasn't been a lot of strategies that address kind of a different type of housing. And I feel like this might be one that we could try to work on. So.
All right. Jesse?
Thanks. Just quickly to play developer devil's advocate. I think ownership is a really important part of this question, because that's my job to talk about student housing. Because this potentially lets me on my property build 3 or 4 small houses and house 16 to 20 students instead of just 8 with an ADU. And so I think that's a critical piece of us figuring out, can we regulate, or can we have ownership requirements in my mind, for this to be effective towards the starter home and not towards more infill for student rentals.
All right, Fred.
I want to be very careful about on the ownership potential limitations here. One of the goals that I would have is to promote middle class expansion and the availability to accumulate equity. And that was one of the things that I particularly liked about the development that's now taking shape on Montague Road in North Amherst, because that will allow the people coming into it to acquire equity and thereby upward mobility, which I think is a long-term public policy gain. So I don't want to lose track of that.
All right. I guess, to rebut or to respond to Jesse, I guess if we are not able to control or predict the ownership, would that be enough reason to not do this?
I'm not sure. I just think
Yeah.
it's a great goal to
Okay.
include.
All right, Angus.
I wanted to talk about my other hobby horse. Is that okay?
Fine with me.
Okay. So there are two questions. I'll try to keep it brief. I've been working on subcommittee item number 8 and staff item number 3, which is about PRP related stuff. This is on the list of potential zoning amendments. I had a grand plan that I sent over to Nate that I think was too ambitious and maybe a little bit crazy of just combining different zones and trying to relax uses in them and dimensional regulations. I think that's probably ambitious. So there are two proposals that I'd like to get the planning board's feedback on. One is the one that's basically stated here, which is my goal would be to combine the PRP, Professional Research Park, and the OP, Office Park zones, and then which are almost identical in their uses and in their dimensional regulations, and to open both of those to housing of different kinds, which are currently not allowed in either. There are basically 3 PRP zones. One is near the North Square Apartments on the way towards Sunderland. One is off of Old Belchertown Road and Route 9 in South Amherst, and the other is along Route 9 as you come into town from Hadley. There is a single office park zone, as far as I can tell, and it is across from the University Drive overlay, where the hospital is, and I think one office building. So that's one proposal. It would be still allowing everything that's still possible in PRP and in OP to be possible in both types of zones, and to increase housing and to allow housing in both of those zones. That's one proposal I have, and that's a simple, pretty easy one. I can share the other proposal, or if anyone has any thoughts, but I just want to gauge whether the planning board supports that idea.
Jara?
I support that idea. Or at least I support adding housing to these zones, at the very least.
All right.
At a minimum, I mean, that's a very light lift. It's just changing the use and maybe some of the dimensional regulations. To me, it seems silly that we have a separate office park zone with 2 properties in it.
Right.
Across from the PRP zone.
Okay. Bruce?
Actually, I think that what Angus is suggesting would be required for the parcel in North Amherst that looks like we're going to see a proposal for housing on the Mitchell parcel. That was the parcel that I think was some years ago proposed by for the Eruptor, a sort of maker, a manufacturing, a high-end, interesting boutique manufacturing building enterprise that was up there that wasn't able to proceed through its inhibitions and so forth through the Conservation Commission. So if there is housing there be allowed, which is what I think is making its way through to us, then this provision would need to be allowed at least on that site. So this is anticipating interests that already apparently exist.
All right. Angus, I guess I can say my initial reaction is positive to what you're suggesting. Johanna?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I remember doing a site visit to one of the PRP sites in East Amherst and hearing the owner of that just talk about how he felt like his hands were tied to provide the thing that there's demand for, and the thing that he can offer, there's not a lot of demand for. So, and then I'm curious, you had mentioned PRP and OP, but in these notes, it actually includes COM as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my initial crazy idea was to combine PRP, OP, and COM all together into one essentially COM district that and allow housing in it. And I looked at the dimensional regulations and the uses and other parts of the bylaw. I don't actually think it would be that hard. The main issue is that there's a bunch of uses allowed in COM towards the end of the bylaw, that the uses section for things like auto shops that I'm not sure we would actually want to allow in the PRP and OP districts based on where they currently are. They're all on major thoroughfares, so it could make sense. There's a ton of water related issues that would limit things, but the idea that I had instead, so I will share with you my other crazy idea, which is if you looking at this document that Nate has pulled up, if you see that number 4 and number 11 are main corridors and RVC BVC zoning. I initially had thought of trying to combine RVC and BVC into one village center zone and allow for housing. As I looked at things, RVC and BVC are actually pretty different. And I think it's a larger conversation that we would need to have about opening up uses in either one or the other. So I had a counter proposal that I'd like to gauge the planning board's interest. And these are just essentially, I'm gauging interest for me to look into it more and talk about it more in the housing and zoning subcommittee. So the other proposal is to actually combine BVC and COM. And if you look at the zoning map, they're almost always touching each other. The BVC, and they're also very, very similar. Neither allow housing. Some parts of the BVC, I think, do allow housing, actually. But the change would be to combine them into one COM. All the COM zones are already along village centers and major thoroughfares, and to allow housing in them. It wouldn't require that many changes to the dimensional standards or the uses, except for allowing housing. But at a minimum, once again, I could just focus on allowing housing in BVC and COM and opening up more housing options. Like at a minimum, that's my goal with all 4 of these zones. But if the zoning could be simplified to achieve, I think, goals more clearly, that would be helpful because there's a lot of zones for what is not a very large town. That's all.
Okay. Bruce?
It occurs to me, Doug, that the question of combining RVC and BVC is raised or is being raised or might be being raised in conjunction with the downtown design standards. I know that was certainly a topic at the last meeting that we all had together with the consultants, but that was some time ago. So, Nate, is that still the case? And I'm thinking that maybe Angus should be privy to that, however that's sugaring out, because it seems to me as though there's a fair amount of consideration by Dodson and Flinker, at least, and if not with you all on the planning staff, that is focused on combining RVC and BVC in one particular part of town anyway, that might inform Angus's deliberations. Just a thought.
Yeah, Bruce, I don't remember any conversations about that specifically. I mean, and they were limited in their geographic area.
They were, but remember they had their vision and they
had the 4 zones,
and depending on option 1, 2, or 3, or 4, and one of
Yeah.
those options involved, I thought, combining. I may be wrong. So if I'm wrong, then
I don't know. Yeah. I'm not objecting to the idea of
no. All I'm saying is that I'm saying is
Dodson's work might
Angus is
inform.
thinking about this,
Yeah.
and so is somebody else thinking about it, and they probably don't know each other or thinking about it. And I'm just saying maybe
Yeah.
they should be introduced to one another. That's all.
Right. Okay. Jara, I will mention it's 24 minutes after 9, and I'm going to run out of steam here.
Perfect. I'll just get on one of my soapbox speeches again for 10
All right.
minutes. Angus, I think this is a really interesting idea. I think what might be helpful is like a table that shows like what the changes might be dimensionally, or just some kind of understanding of, we obviously know the great benefit of adding housing to these zones potentially, but like what are some of the other trade-offs that might be less obvious if we were to merge any of these districts into one? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
All right. Nate and then Jesse.
Yeah, I just have a few things. One, there's 2 A&R plans and applications we'd want to get to tonight. So just to make sure we save a little energy
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
And in terms of, Angus, what you said, I think, staff is also looking at housing in the PRP. So I'd like to say that we can work together on that. So again, I think that's another one that let's just put it on, the 2026 timeframe, right? I think this kind of revising the cluster development or traditional neighborhood subdivision number 2 up top, and this PRP, let's say those are 2 things that the subcommittee, can work on. And then there's a few things that staff would work on. Just quickly, the office park is covered by the University Drive overlay. So agreed, it does look like there's only 2 properties in town that are zoned office park right now, and the U Drive overlay covers them. I don't know if we need, to change it, but I think Angus's approach is a good one. I think the East Amherst study might have a conclusion that down there, we have 5 different zones. Maybe it's just one zone. Maybe it's BVC with changes to the dimensional standards. Because why do we have COM, RVC, BVC, RN, blah, 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 in an area that we say is really part of a development center? I think there's nuances there, JR, to your point. So like COM has, additional lot area per units, because the fear was that if you allow housing, that's such a prominent, development right now, that we would get apartments and then we would forego any opportunity to have commercial space because we just have apartments everywhere. And so, that's where then we came up with mixed-use building standards, because before we didn't. And so we get these mixed-use buildings that had, a mop closet as their retail space. And so, there's these little pieces that need to be worked on. I think the idea, though, is sound. And so some of it might be, through the East Amherst study, there's this. I think when we look at the master plan, I know this is kind of long-range planning, is there a way to then simplify the zoning to make things, a little more coherent? So you don't look at, like if you look at the zoning map right now, there's a lot of overlays, and it's really hard to say what, in some areas, what really is happening. I think the zoning was trying to respond to what's on the ground, but maybe we want to say we want to actually inform more what happens, and still be respectful of what's there. So, I guess my long-winded thing is, let's do PRP, housing and PRP, and this traditional neighborhood subdivision method, and say, let's try to get this done in the next 3 months or 4 months, and come up with, zoning language that we bring back to the planning board that maybe can move forward as a zoning amendment to council. Like I'm just throwing it out there. Like, let's try to, keep it moving. We can keep talking about these other ideas, but like, let's try to come up with what are those 2 or 3 priorities for the subcommittee. Staff has a few, and we can, move them together.
All right, Jesse.
Thanks. switching gears slightly, but still on the theme of what's the subcommittee work on. With your permission, Doug, I'd like to take 2 minutes and try and engage the planning board members on something that came up earlier, which is if we think it's our purview to think about strategies around student rental, density, distancing, regulation, numbers of occupants, all these things that keep coming up that we've tried to get votes on, at least in the full board and council, have just failed. And I'm no judgment, but if the majority of the board thinks this is not our job, I don't want to think about it in this context. I don't want to talk about it in this group because I don't want to waste our collective effort, despite the huge amount of work that Bruce has done in this direction, right? I think it's worthwhile for us to just take a straw poll right now. I would love to do that if you're okay with that. Again,
Sure.
the point is, should subcommittee work on these things?
Yeah.
One piece, I think, is the student home definition, which is, to me, a cornerstone in order to get anything else in place along these lines. And the other things are the minimum distancing idea, the just percent in an area, percent in the town, allowable student rentals, any kind of regulation on that. I'm trying to read the room, and my sense from before was there might not be interest collectively from the group to work on these things in this body. So I guess maybe just do a thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah, I mean, you had a couple of ideas there, and
Well, but they're all, to me, they're all the same thing.
okay.
They're all trying to regulate in some way for the benefit of our town, student rentals. And if we collectively, board members, are not interested in that in this format, I don't think we should waste our time on it anymore because it keeps coming up, right?
Okay.
And maybe we're better served to look at other things in this format.
All right, so the question is, how would you be in favor or opposed to the board pursuing, can I call it limitations
Sure.
or
Yeah.
controls on
I mean,
student rentals?
any word's going to have a negative connotation to someone, so it almost doesn't matter. I think we all understand what I'm talking about.
All right. All right. Shall I just go from one to the next, do a sort of roll call on this?
We could do it that way. We could do a thumbs up, thumbs down.
Well, okay. Do you want to do? So if you're in favor of it, please raise some part of your body that I can see on the screen.
Pretty clear. Okay.
So there's two.
Well, I think it's
I'm in
important
favor
that
of-
we. Sorry, go ahead, Bruce.
I was going to say, I'm in favor of discussing it. For example, I've got, I think now as an opinion about minimum distancing, which is not favorable, but I think I should make sure that I understand it and I'm not thinking, I'm not missing something. So I'm in favor of discussing it, but I don't know that I'm committing to how
Right. So could we, as a board, ever imagine we would vote collectively yes on something along these lines to move it toward council for their vote? Or do we think that's not the job of planning board to think about regulating housing in this way?
Oh, it is the job.
That's what I'm asking. Is it our job?
I think you're asking, would we support it?
No.
Would we recommend it?
Can you imagine any version of one of these things that you think is the planning board's purview to try and put in our bylaws somehow?
Yeah, I mean,
because that's been debated, right?
I guess I'm having trouble with the wording you're using because the purview question, yes, it's our purview. Is it something I would vote for? Probably not.
Okay.
So I'm a yes and a no. So
Understood. So maybe I need to ask the question differently. Really just about, is it our purview to think about ways we could regulate student housing?
Sure. I mean, we've had some legal questions that have been raised.
That's fine. I'm not saying we pass it all. I'm saying, should we spend our time thinking about these different mechanisms in this group? Maybe it's a more complicated question than you think it is.
Do the three other hands that I see, are you guys responding to Jesse? Okay, then Fred and then Angus and then Jara.
Yeah, I'm a yes and a no also because uh, I've got a big problem with identifying something as a student house. So in that sense, that leads me in one direction. On the other hand, I have a similar problem in terms of, I'm very interested in looking at the overall economic impact of zoning. And one of the things that I'm looking at in thinking about that is how that will impact the likely population of student student occupants. And both of those uh, things can happen at the same time. And that's why I'm having trouble trying to figure out how to respond to the query that you posed.
Okay, let me phrase it a different way because I think this captures the whole thing. Should we, as a planning board, be trying to regulate occupancy? Because that's really what it boils down to.
Okay, so it's not the purview question. It's
Right.
it's
Right.
should we try to regulate occupancy?
That's the job of planning board, to regulate occupancy. If you believe that, I'd like to know yes. If you don't believe that, I'd like to know no.
Okay. All right. Angus?
I think maybe I think I have two thoughts. One is I wonder if we should make this an agenda item for the next planning board meeting to discuss a little bit more fully. Because I think Jesse, you're right to ask this question. I think we maybe need more time on it. My personal view is I don't know so much about whether I think it's the purview or whatever. I don't think that focusing on student housing through these kinds of regulations is a good use of our time. And so I would oppose having the housing and zoning subcommittee pursue it. I would oppose having the planning board pursue it. The underlying problem is we have students who need housing. And so I would rather focus on things like the North Amherst overlay that's actually getting at the root problem and not trying to paper over the problem and divert students to some other community that we need to find housing for them. So that's what I would recommend.
Okay, Chara?
I think that well, Jesse, I just kept going back and forth every time you reframed the question. But I think it'd be malpractice of us to not recognize the student population as a extremely influential part of the housing market. I don't know if the rules and regulations that have been proposed so far are ones that I would support, but I do support us making concerted efforts to think about ways to support students who are seeking housing. And I think Angus is exactly right in that we can in a lot of ways. But so like I'm thinking like what can we do as a planning board, for instance, to get the student building that was burnt down a month ago rebuilt as quickly as possible so those kids can get back into those units. Like that's something that I would like to support on this board. I don't know how we can. I'll stop because it's late. But yeah, we need to talk about students.
Okay.
I think it'd be silly not
we
to.
need to
Yeah.
have this conversation a different way. I just also need to say, I say this all the time, I am not in no way anti-student. I completely agree with everything you both said. I just see this as a vital part of the planning conversation in order to have economic vitality in our town, which is where tonight started. I think we can't achieve that without solving this problem, both more housing and conserving some neighborhood vitality. Okay, put it on the agenda for later. I'll try and rephrase a simpler question.
All right, thank you, Jesse. All right, time is 9:38. Why don't we move on? Anybody opposed to that? Okay. All right, we'll go on to the old business topics not reasonably anticipated. Pam or Nate, I'm seeing you shake your heads, so no. New business not anticipated? Nothing? All right, now we're up to the Form A&R subdivision applications, and you said there were two.
We do have two. Nate, I can bring it up if you want to share details.
Sure. For both of these, the fire department and town engineer didn't have any issues with them, so they were able to look at them. The first one is up on Market Hill Road, and it's there's a combining. It's one owner owns what is a flag lot, and they're buying the frontage lot adjacent to it, and so it's just creating a bigger lot there. So Pam brings that up.
It's coming.
Nate-
It's coming. Here we
Nate- Do you know what the motivation is to combine the lots rather than just to own two lots?
Yeah, I think there's for assessment and tax purposes, it's much it's cheaper as a homeowner to not have a separate building lot. So to
Oh,
have
really?
one big lot.
Okay,
I also think there's a development happening on what is lot 34, the flag lot, and so I think just to get some setbacks and space, it would work better as two lots. So the owner, I think, it just it would feel like a better site if it were
you mean as one lot?
Sorry, yeah, as one lot. Yeah, to go from two lots to one lot. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So the zigzag lines in the middle here is what will be removed, and existing lot 4 becomes combined with lot 3, it becomes lot 34. So it becomes this 2.27 acre lot.
Mm-hmm. And they both have frontage, and there's plenty of room for the housing circle.
Right. So right now there's this flag lot that has this 40-foot frontage, and then there's this frontage lot,
Yep.
which will become part of this much bigger lot. Right. That's
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Does anybody object to me signing as on behalf of the board that subdivision approval is not required for this property combination? I'm not seeing anybody indicating no. All right. What's the second one?
do.
The
Sorry.
second one is down in South Amherst on Southeast Street. So it's a pretty large parcel. And the idea is to create a separate lot on the back of the property that would be sold. So it's not a building lot. It doesn't have frontage, but it's creating a separate lot that would be combined with a neighboring property at some point in the future. And when Pam brings it up, the lot to the north, which isn't shown, it had the same. Oh, it is actually.
Right here.
This big lot right here, not lot 1, the big lot above it, with all these little roads on it, the dotted lines, that has actually been A&R'd to create a, it's not one, it's a 2 or 3 lots now. And so lot 1 in parcel A down below, the focus of the A&R is this property.
This part right here.
And it's all one big property. And what they're going to do is they're going to create a parcel A in the back, a 4-acre property. And so what I was saying is this property up above has done the same thing. So right now, like, this property, this big one is really 3 properties, 1, 2, 3. And the planning board approved that a few years ago in terms of A&Ring that. So it's a similar process on these big, larger lots. It says not a buildable lot. So that's, and it says to be combined with other land of Jason Edwards. So, because of that on the plan, the building commissioner requires that because it doesn't have frontage and there's no access to it. So, we don't have an issue with having this plan show this as a separate parcel that's not a building lot.
So for a subdivision, you need frontage. And so this is creating a parcel without frontage. And is the is the Jason Edwards. So that's the owner of the lot 1 and parcel A.
Correct.
And oh, Jason Edwards owns to the east, which is not on this parcel, on this map.
Right here.
So that's probably what's going to be combined.
I'm not clear that that's how it will be combined, but I think the idea is just to create this separate 4-acre parcel.
Uh-huh. All right, well, I don't feel like we see very many of this type of thing. Angus, and then Johanna.
Yeah, I mean, I guess could I just ask, is the goal to create, and maybe Johanna, you might be speaking to this as well. It seems like in the one above, there's some kind of farmland conservation trust. It's also this parcel A seems to be in a floodplain, maybe. I guess I'm just trying to understand why this is necessary, and why it's being. Is this the only way that they can hive off a part of their land into a separate property? Is there any other mechanism they can do that, or they have to go through subdivision?
This is we're agreeing that subdivision review is not required.
Oh, okay.
So,
I'm sorry.
So we're not operating under the subdivision bylaw.
Okay.
But we're agreeing that that the subdivision bylaw doesn't apply to this subdivision of land.
Thanks. Sorry. That clarifies.
Yeah, I mean, so I think, the reality is the owner, wants to create this 4-acre property that will, I think, then be sold. And so they need to create a fee simple way to do that. I don't know, there's wetlands right where this line is, I don't really think it's gonna become a building lot. It may just be that one of the adjacent properties, or an owner wants it for some reason. I don't really know the impetus necessarily, but they need a fee simple way to do that. So this is that mechanism.
All right.
That's my question.
Johanna.
Thank you. So I guess I'm just still trying to understand the intent here, and maybe we don't know the answer to this, but it seems to me like, at least based on the notes on parcel A, it says not a buildable lot to be combined with other land of Jason Edwards. And then Jason Edwards owns adjacent land that is both lot 1 and on the backside. And then we don't really know what's happening. I guess this would be north of this lot. Maybe Jason Edwards owns land there too.
Or he's going to sell it to Robert Gray.
Or he might sell it to Robert Gray on the other side. So I don't know, like I think what I would expect is if we approve this, then a little bit down the road, we would then get another request to combine parcel A with some other plot of land. Is that an accurate way of assessing what I think is going on here?
Nate?
You might. I mean, you might not, right? I mean, the other, as not a buildable lot, it doesn't have that premium in terms of assessment. And so it could be that a property owner, someone buys it and they just maintain it as a landlocked property that they, maybe Jason Edwards access it because, I think, whatever, there's a field on it or there's some tree, wood lot, whatever reason, I don't know, right? But it could be that if they sell it here, that then, right, there's another A&R in 6 months where they want to, combine it with the property to the north. I don't know if that would happen, but it could be likely.
Do we need to know this? Do we
don't.
care?
It's not, no, I mean, I think it's just a line of inquiry because, as Doug mentioned, we don't really see this very often. And so, but, it's not, as long as we feel like that, we still have a compliant zoning lot with lot 1 with frontage and size, or, that's not changing, and that lot, parcel A is also okay. And that's kind of all we need, provide Doug.
Yeah, we don't need to know it, but we're naturally curious people. Okay, so any objections to my signing this one too? All right, great. Pam, I'll make an appointment with you at some point.
You bet.
All right, upcoming ZBA applications. Anything we should know about? I know you've mentioned some that are in the works, but they're not here yet.
I didn't see it.
No,
No,
I
I
don't
don't
think
have
so.
anything to bring forward. Do you, Nate?
I don't.
Okay. SPP, SPR, SUB applications.
Yeah, we're the planning department. We're in receipt of a mixed-use project down on Southeast Street.
Okay,
You know, Amir Mikchi developed a property behind Florence Savings Bank a few years ago, and he owns a few properties across the street. So it's behind the Cumberland Farms on
yeah,
the east side of Southeast Street. So that's something where it's going through the Conservation Commission right now, and you know, I would put it out there that we're going to try to open the hearing on February 25th for that. So it's a 80-unit mixed-use building with 5,000 square feet of non-residential space on the first floor, and yeah, I mean, I think there may be some changes just because of the Conservation Commission review, but they submitted a full application, so we're gonna, get that going and get that review happening with the planning board.
okay. All right, planning board committee and liaison reports. Bruce, anything for PVPC?
Nope.
All right, how about CPAC? Angus?
Yeah, we are in the midst of all of our meetings. It's a lot. We are meeting tomorrow, then we meet again in 2 weeks. We are currently voting. I'm putting the community housing and affordable housing applications pretty highly, and I'll be pushing for those. And then, but we just have a ton of funds that have been requested, and we're not going to be able to get them all. So, happy to take questions if anyone has them, or you can come to our meeting tomorrow night.
All right, thank you for doing that, Angus. Hope you're enjoying it. Good. All right, report of chair. I really don't have anything to report tonight. Nate and Pam, anything from staff?
No, thanks, thanks for meeting with, Jeff, myself. I don't really have anything. We did mention, I've always mentioned the downtown design standards, but we are hoping that in February, they'll be, made public, and then they'll get to the planning board and other boards in March. And so, stay tuned for that. I will give just a brief update on the design review board. There's just been some sign applications for downtown. So, restaurants proposing new signs. That's what they've been looking at. Nothing, not any big projects.
Okay, thank you. Fred, I see your hand.
Yeah, Nate, did you make any progress getting the engineering on the North Amherst intersection from DPW?
No, I asked, and then someone said, "I'm sure it's here," and then and then that was it. But I never followed up. So thanks for the reminder.
Great. All right, if no one has anything else, the time is 9:52 and we are adjourned. Thank you all for hanging in there. I guess our next meeting is February 3rd or 4th, maybe?
4th, maybe?
Okay. All right, have a good evening.
Bye all.
What's left of it.
Bye, everybody.
Good night, Pam.
Good night, Doug. We'll talk soon about A&Rs.
Yeah, thank you.
You bet.
Bye.
Bye.